Hey everyone, and welcome back to the Fanfiction podcast. I'm so excited to have you here. Today, we're diving into a brand new story, Is It Wrong for the Strongest Tea Get Even Stronger Part 2 by Keedman Cousland. Before we jump in, don't forget to like, share, subscribe, and drop your thoughts in the comments below. I'd love to hear what you think. Is it wrong to take a step in the Dungeon? No one soloed Monster Rexes. It just wasn't done. If you were strong enough to solo a Monster Rex, then you should be operating 20 floors deeper anyways. Groups of people a level or two lower than the Monster Rex teaming up for reliable high-class Excelia was just how they were handled. Right wrist, left shoulder blade, skull, fourth rib. Yet, Tsubaki could only repeat those 4 points and keep fighting. Even someone as Smith first and adventurer accidentally like her could only survive to reach the level she had because she was able at times to acknowledge that the only choice was to fight. And maybe survive. Right wrist, left shoulder blade, skull, fourth rib. She was sent tumbling, but she also struck back with each blow. The right wrist of the Udius shattered, the repeated blows to that specific area finally breaking through. It was a difference, but only a minor one. Its reach was lowered, but it just started using the Radius and Ulnar as both for clubbing blows but also a makeshift spears. Left shoulder blade, skull, fourth rib. Her ability to target the weakened shoulder blade was lowered. Now alone, she lacked the agility to reach its back. A shame as breaking that weakened bone would cripple the movement of its left arm. One attempt too many to gain the Udius rear, for that strike left her smacked out of midair, giving up that target. Skull, fourth rib. There was a general strategy to tackle the Udius, like all the Monster Rexes. Break one of its arms. Lower its ability to strike. Then hit the skull. While it isn't defeated till the magic stone is broken or removed, the Udius movements became slower and less coordinated the more damage the skull underwent. Then you attempted to pierce its thick, magically reinforced rib cage to get to the magic stone. Nolan had managed to crack the fourth rib in the same strike that left him vulnerable to the counterblow that had removed him from the battle. Striking the skull on a monster as large as the Udius was hard. Tsubaki didn't have such great agility to manage that, nor the allies to distract it and leave a path opened. Charging up its arm with a defiant scream failed as it shook her off, her falling onto spikes and leaving her feet bloody. Throwing her Benishigya allowed it to connect, but it was deflected while only chipping at the thick skill, and her attempt to run and reclaim it left her dodging the spikes once again that nonetheless left her bleeding throughout her entire left side. Just getting pissed and trying furiously to just destroy the other hand as it threw a punch at her left her once again flying back. Finally, she fell to both knees. Only instinct kept her hand grasping her weapon. Her other arm was hanging limp again, dislocated in the clash. Blood was flowing into her one eye, even if she had to ignore it to see anything. Merely trying to stand made her scream in pain, feeling like her spine would break if she tried to move any further. Left hand, skull, fourth rib. She still spoke thus, even as she stood up regardless of her spine's cracking protests. Even she didn't know why. She knew how this was going, as the Udius approached slowly, as if savoring the victory that has been delayed so long. Tsubaki didn't have the sort of agility to attack where she wanted. She didn't have the sheer offensive power to turn any actual openings into battle-changing results. Spartai was spawning en masse now, and were coming towards her from all sides. A wave of skeletons with glowing red eyes, ready to swallow her and add her bones to their numbers. How long was this Udius going to take? She raised Benishigya, the weapon that hadn't yet chipped or worn the only thing that might provide some comfort to her. Did a monster have the sort of awareness and intent to draw things out simply to give it all a more menacing air? Apparently, yes, for the Udius stopped just outside its own range. It didn't even send spikes at her again. Didn't send its minions in. Instead, its remaining arm rose. A sudden pillar of black also rose from the ground. No, not a pillar. A sword. Grasping its new weapon, the Udius lifted it up and brought it down right on top of her. The loudest noise yet erupted in the battlefield. Hey, she must have taken a blow to the head as she forgot about Otter in that final stretch. The king stood before her once again, back almost appearing like a shield for her. His arms were raised, holding a sword. A sword that had blocked the massive black blade of the now armed Udius. The immense temperature and force contained in the strike scorching his skin and the melting around him, but he remained standing. Great trenches dug by his feet as he was pushed back, but not thrown from them. Tsubaki looked around, forced to acknowledge even more that he had most certainly saved her life with that block. The ground all around had been stripped clean by the force of the blow. A great triangle that spread out from the Udius blade, flattening everything at least 100 meters in front of it. Even all the Spartoi that had been gathering blown away into dust. Only the spot where she was a sole spot, right behind Otter, unmarked. To draw a blade, interesting. Otter's low voice spoke, now looking intently at the monster Rex. Shifting his blade, he threw it back. The Udius retreated slightly, seemingly remembering the other adventurer here as well. It allowed Otter to turn slightly to look at Tsubaki and say, "Your stamina is drained. That is enough. You even showed me something more interesting than I'd imagined. I shall take it from here, Cyclops." He then turned back to the Udius, a hunger lick in his eyes. It was hell. Fitting, as Otter felt like he'd been through hell. Only Stortus Otter and the healing power DA it granted prevented him from looking like nothing more than a pile of meat by this point. The slow but automatic regenerative ability at the cost of mind was truly essential in preventing Otter's willpower outstripping what even his body could take. It also matched exceedingly well with the spirit healing DA also granted by Stortus Otter, which automatically started regenerating mind after usage, which in this case included the mind drain from healing power. That's not to say he wasn't a mess. His shirt was gone, and wounds littered his body. He had to have between half a dozen and a dozen cracked bones. Every muscle felt strained and weak. Most of his equipment was destroyed by this point too. His boots were gone, and his feet bleeding, shredded, and stabbed constantly with black chips of the ground. Bela was hardly better. Much of its body now had bone plating to cover wounds too great for it to regenerate properly, and they clearly affected it. It moved slower now. Heavier. Its arm was gone, even that bone spear shattered again, and its balance went with it. It was moving like someone with a crippled leg. Its other hand lacked a finger. A near miss had also cut open part of its face, slashing its equivalent of a cheek to extend its mouth on one side to create a hideous mockery of a half-smile. Honestly, both were half dead by this point. Yet, they continued fighting. Otter cut into its body, before jumping and rolling over a swipe of its arm. Another cut to its arm. Bela tried a widespread beam, and it connected. Otter just went right through it though, slashing it through the middle, and enduring what remained to connect him. It got him close enough to its arm to shoot forward, drawing a spike from his belt. The last spike. A spike which he drove into the upper arm of Bela's remaining arm, and then lashing out with a double stomp that drove it deep even as it launched him away. Bela cried, its arm slumping in a way that made it clear that even that one had now been rendered largely useless. Otter sensed opportunity, and prepared to move in again. But then he heard noise. Bela did too, crying victoriously as he looked to see the new arrivals. Yet another monster horde, this time coming from the 50th floor. Took longer, due to the safe floor there. Otter turned to glare at Bela again, before turning his gaze to the weapon in his hand before himself. Both he and his enemy were in terrible shape. Otter's own body was reaching its limit, and he knew it. Yet, the supreme black sword remained in his hand. Worn and tested, but still whole. With that last spike used, his last remaining weapon. That had also made a difference. Both half dead or not, Otter had very much felt the tide turning. Bela's arms were broken and useless, and its movements slowed. He could win this if things had remained as they were. Yet now, another horde of monsters was arriving. Level 5 monsters, when he was at his weakest. He hadn't felt this weak and broken since gluttony had forced him to his knees 7 years ago. Otter hesitated, and Bela sensed it, letting out a new cry that made his head snap up. Bela's head was raised, and energy was gathering. A great magic circle formed before its head, and he saw a symbol form in its eye. The energy didn't peak either. Already as strong as any other attack it had let out, it was still gathering more. "So, you do have a secret too," Otter growled, all his feelings of weakness and hesitation flaring as he looked at this new attack gathering. "Run. You'll die here. You can come back another time. There's no shame in retreat." Such words and sentiments ran through his mind with such clarity that it was as if people screamed them into his ear. And Otter felt himself instinctively take a step back. Shame overcame him, yet he remembered the words of those before he came down. Freya's command that he come back alive. He had willingly suffered defeat and disgrace before, for he was one that challenged walls he could not hope to climb. So long as he used that to create a block that is later used to overcome it, he would suffer 100 defeats. As his fighting spirit fell, his hand dropped till the supreme black sword clanged on the ground. The noise it made forced his eyes away from Bela and its charging attack to the sword. Immediately, he felt buoyed. All his other weapons had broken, but this one yet remained. Otter's hand grasping it still had strength too. Who said that he was lost here? Who decided that? Why did he allow despair and defeat to creep up on him without resistance? He was as beaten and broken as he had been when gluttony forced him to his knees, but Otter had still been able to stand back up then and keep fighting till he claimed victory. Otter was still standing, and still had a weapon in hand. That was enough to not retreat. Bela shrieked with unmistakable anger, drawing Otter's gaze again. The sound repeated when he planted his feet and raised the supreme black sword again. Utterly furious. I wonder. Otter mumbled aloud, taking a step forward. King, don't die. Orario's mightiest can't fall here. Why are you risking yourself like this? Voices he didn't know seemed to clamor in his head, drawing to mind the voices that had once called upon him against gluttony for salvation. Is this just all in my head? Otter mumbled to himself, stepping forward again. Feeling the noises dampen with each step forward. Fears and justifications manifesting from my own desire to flee, on the edge of death as I am? Or is this you? Don't be selfish. Your life can't be spent without dire need. This is not a fight you must win. An attack on an opponent's will. Otter continued, stepping forth again. The noises falling even more silent. Does it even matter? In the end, I must overcome them regardless. Brat, you've gotten cocky. Otter's eyes flicked to the side, seeing a figure clad in black armor that drew forth a rush of memories of defeat, disgrace, and weakness. Zold smirked and spoke. Do you think surpassing me is so easy? Or did the little boar genuinely think he already had with that farce of a dudash pointless? Otter firmly stated, supreme black sword lashing out to slice and disperse the vision of gluttony. I already killed that guy. Poison doesn't matter. Every fight is uneven, and everyone comes into it with their own strengths and weaknesses. Zold had been superior to Otter in every way walking into that fight. To rage and grasp any possibility for victory was the nature of an adventurer. To face someone your superior yet grasp that one possibility in 100 that allows you to surpass them was the greatest of victories. That a beast seeks to defy fate and reach beyond his place and talent. A new voice now spoke, the figure of Althea now appearing. Disdainful look already on her face. Do you believe yourself a hero, boar? The one this world needs silence. He cut off, walking right past her. I need not heed the words of one who hit her limit at level 7. The incarnation of talent. Starting as an adventurer within 6 months of him, yet so often making him feel weak and slow. Especially the speed in which she leveled up after reaching level 5 had shocked all, making everyone seem her inferior. Yet her very talent was derived from her doom. The skill that enhanced her talent and power tied to her limitations. A person who surpassed all others, but never once truly considered going beyond the limits that fate and her own mindset had placed on herself. A person that would never become level 8. Otter, why are you disobeying me? A new voice now spoke. This one actually made him stop. The vision of Freya now pressed against him, almost making him feel her as she spoke. I ordered you to come back. My most important command. Why do you press forward when even you know that you can die? Otter took a deep breath, but still moved to step past her as he said with eyes fixed forward. Because I am listening to you. Your oldest desire from me. To become the mightiest. You might believe that I accomplished that 7 years ago, but I know differently. So now, I shall step forward in your name. Freya disappeared too, and no new visions came forth. Otter was relieved. Maybe another might have sought comfort in the appearances of others. Somehow managed to turn the visions into encouragement. Otter was not one such person. Just once, he had listened to others beyond his goddess. He had sought victory for others. Listened to the cries of souls ascending to heaven for a hero. Allowed the passion and roars of others turn into his own strength. Once, planting his feet again and meeting Bela's gaze, he spoke only to himself. Here, we are alone. Let others be called heroes, and be cheered. Let cheers and please give strength to ones who need it. I shall triumph by my own strength. Otter fought for his goddess. Yet, here and now. This is a battle I have chosen, Otter said, raising the supreme black sword before him. For reasons I have deemed worthy. You don't just choose to level up. Petty. Before comforting yourself with the idea of my failure and planning to capitalize, perhaps remember that you'll never catch up to me if you do not keep moving forward yourselves. At least then such a word wouldn't describe you so well. Yet, do you really think it's that easy anymore, Otter? When did the heroes of Orario become so faint-hearted? It shamed him, But only the last several days had revealed something crucial to Otter. Orario had lost something. Otter was not a people person. He was no braver, to make speeches. He was no leader, to rally adventurers. He was no hero. He was a simple man, and he saw only one way for him to proceed. I shall take the next step, he whispered to himself, yet it echoed in his own heart. By giving them an example, an unreachable goal, a back to chase. For there is still further to go, he continued. After all, that was how he yet drew strength. Once, he had looked up to gluttony and others that repeatedly cast him into the mud of defeat and humiliation, dreaming of the day he'd surpass them, resolving himself to ensure that day arrived. Gluttony and silence were the walls of 7 years ago, but more yet remained. He remembered that old man, the fool that always talked of heroes, the man who came back broken and dying from the Black Dragon, yet still talked of heroes, who used his final act to deal Otter a final defeat as a new level 6, only to then go and die on Bravest Spear while talking of sacrifice. You are an interesting kid, Otter, but you shall never defeat me as you currently are. So, keep growing, and don't stop. Maxim, the Sword Emperor, captain of the Zeus Familia. Level 8. He remembered that mad elf. The healer who despised the world and wouldn't die. The one who one-sidedly forced promises on Otter, and yet broke them herself. The immortal who died out of sight and without even a whimper. This world is hell, my little piggy. It's just a matter of how long the heavens curse us with enduring it. If you don't like it, you must grow to defy the heavens. That'd be amusing to watch. Syria, the queen, captain of the Hero Familia. Level 9. And yet more even beyond that. Level 10. Albert Wallenstein. There are walls yet to scale, he declared, gripping the handle of the supreme black sword so hard his fingers hurt. A mountain that waits to be climbed. And when he reaches the peak of the summit, that's when he starts building that peak higher himself, to stretch a hand towards the sky itself. Otter lifted the weapon before him, feeling something crystallize inside him, the development of a dream long spoken, something tempered and refined by experience showing him the true weight of said dream. The 8 years he spent as a false mightiest, 7 years as an underwhelming mightiest, and only alone like this, where only he was speaking only to himself, could he declare such aloud and have it most resonate with himself. I shall become the true mightiest. His eyes now looked beyond Bela, even as Bela screeched as if it understood just that. Sterling compassion, golden plains. Bela screeched in victory as he started to slowly chant, its attack charging yet further. It is my fate to serve as a brute of war. If Otter wanted to kill it as effectively as possible, he should have jumped at it, interrupted its final attack, forced it to fire prematurely. All he was doing was allowing it to build up even more power, and for the horde of monsters to approach. He was needlessly choosing a harder path. Run through dash yet, Otter's eyes were fixed beyond this. He wouldn't take a step if it came at the cost of the next. This was no longer about level 8. It was about level 9. Level 10. If he could not endure this, then becoming the mightiest was a mere fantasy and he should fall here and make way for one who can. Carrying the divine will of the goddess. A power like none other gathered, Bela unleashed its attack that dwarfed all previous. The beam destroyed the ground as it homed in on Otter, seeking nothing less than the complete annihilation of all who opposed it. Sword encased in gold and resolved to win or die, Otter met it. Hildes Vini. No one challenged Otter as he ascended the dungeon, even if he was more than half dead. All who saw him simply retreated, and watched him pass with wide eyes. About to keel over or not, he carried an aura around him that demanded that much from them. By the time he exited the dungeon, word had spread. People were waiting, watching as he emerged from the dungeon. A large, red, glass-like orb under one arm, the other holding the remains of the supreme black sword over his shoulder, wounds still littering his body. Yet they all went silent as he looked them all over, waiting until he finally announcing quietly and simply, Bela is dead. He then walked past them, heading back to his goddess. The news spread across Orario with remarkable speed. The king killed Bela. Otter soloed Bela, only picking up speed and urgency as more came out. A great feat. The king has done his great feat. Confirmation inflaming the interest and disbelief of all who heard. Otter has leveled up. The king has reached level 8. Orario's mightiest has taken the next step. Until the news eventually reached a manor of twilight, and its Paolum hero, who dropped his pen with a blank face as he heard. Gather around, Gareth called out as they moved out of his office towards the central mess hall. Not that he needed to do much. It looked as if just about the entire familia was already gathered, already discussing the news that seemed to be on everyone's lips. Loki also flashed a smirk at them. Overall, everyone was soon looking up at them as they stood on the upper balcony looking down on them. Finn looked over them. From AIS, who had grown from that little girl they discovered. Tiona and Tyon, the Amazons he'd personally recruited. Beat, Raoul and Anakitty. Alicia, Navi, Lefia, Cruz. He took the time to look at each one, locking eyes for a moment with each to show he was seeing them. From executive to supporter. Only then did he sigh before announcing, "It looks like you have all heard. By all accounts, it has been confirmed from the lips of Goddess Freya herself to other gods, Otter has accomplished his great feat to allow him to reach level 8. That made hushed whispers break out, many blanching at the news. It was bad, momentous news, after all. The number of people in 1,000 years to reach level 8 was still in the single digits. There was also no denying that Otter was the member of a rival familia that had given many few reasons to think anything else of him. At level 8, an entire level lay between him and the next strongest adventurers. I know and acknowledge the worries some of you might have, Finn continued grimly, taking a deep breath. I also can't deny it. By even the most generous of estimation, the Loki familia is now definitively merely the second strongest familia in the city. That only drew silence. Finn still knew it had to be said. While the Freya familia admittedly had the edge even before this, it was still close enough for there to still be some leeway. The coordination of their familia at least provided that. It was also a point of pride for them. Before this, Finn would have given his familia a 40% chance against the Freya familia. It would have been a mere 15%, but something instinct made Finn's thumb throb. He chose not to try and track down just what it was, but he believed there to be a good chance that some unknown factor would arise that would tilt the odds in their favor. 40% was what felt right to him, and that was enough of a chance that could be grasped. Now, 10% was likely being optimistic even with that unknown factor. He wasn't even sure if he, Reveria, and Gareth together could defeat Otter now, and they almost certainly wouldn't manage it without loss. In other words, we are in the same position as we were 3 years ago, he continued though, strongly, making them listen to him. And is that wrong? Is that too much to handle? Not a single person here joined this familia thinking we didn't have further do go, or did I miss something? A few answered rather uncertainly in the negative. Every person who has joined has known that we are in this for the long run. That every year, every expedition, and every level gained has been closing the gap, Finn said, starting to pace. Is any one of you so foolish as to think our enemy would not advance too? Do you think they are weak and without will themselves? Do you need such pathetic enemies for us to triumph? No, more chanted this time in response. It is exactly because they too will fight and struggle against us that makes them worthy opponents that are worth struggling against to overcome. Finn declared, slamming hands on the rail of the balcony for effect, naturally holding his strength back to not shatter it too. The king is Orario's mightiest, but he is still just one man. I ask of you, Loki familia, shall one man's level up steal your courage? No. For 7 years, this familia has grown in preparation for the time when we shall illustrate to Orario who the greatest familia in this city of heroes is. Well, the time has come. Another has dictated that the time when Orario shall step forward has come, and that is my mistake. There was always another group we could raise to the next rank. Another expedition to undergo. Always more to do, Finn said, pounding his own chest in reprimand. Yet the time preparing has not been wasted. Look around you. See how far our familia alongside each and every one of you has come. Our efforts have not been wasted. And the time for us to take the next step ourselves has come, he roared now. It made everyone jump. Some in surprise, but also others merely jumping to their feet themselves. Infected by the energy he was putting into his voice. Everyone getting themselves worked up, and the electricity in the air quickly spreading. Beat was also standing on a table, shouting insults. Tiona was just cheering from the energy, while Tyon was cheering on Finn just as energetically. AIS was more subdued, but her own eyes were hard and a cute little expression of determination formed on her face while she clenched a fist before her. We shall push further, Finn declared. I shall be moving up our next major expedition as much as able, and I declare here and now that we shall reach the glacier territory of the 59th floor. That is no goal. That is a statement of fact. And after that, we shall do it again. And again. Even if it is just us executives that deep, we shall start conquering the dungeon. And we shall achieve this through the efforts of everyone here, he reiterated, looking to meet eyes again. I want everyone here to consider how you shall push further. If you are ready to seek the next step, figure out how you intend to. If you need to push yourselves further, decide where you shall do so. I want to hear from every single one of you, and I shall leave my door open for all of you at least once, day or night. If you know how you shall move forward, I shall listen. Wait, is that an invitation to interrupt you at night? Tyon demanded with starry eyes even as most everyone cheered. Finn pointed at her and immediately replied, Women go to Reveria at night. That got a few laughs. And it is not only you all either, Finn added on, gesturing to Reveria and Gareth at his sides too. Everyone is participating here. We three are making this declaration to all of you here and now. To level 7, Reveria said simply, nodding at those looking up at her. We sure as hell aren't going to allow Otter to relax without someone nipping on his heels, Gareth joked with a broad grin. And boy did that get a reaction from the familiar. It made Finn grin before he shouted. The time for patience is over. We shall all press forward. Forward in the face of adversity. Forward to overcome our weakness. Forward to grasp the dream that lay beyond the horizon of all who have delved into the dungeon. Forward. Now, go run and tell the cooks to get working. Go buy food and drink from anywhere you can get it and bring it back. It's all on me, Finn informed them. Tonight, we celebrate Orario's mightiest taking the next step. And tomorrow, we awaken and start our push to make the Loki familiar Orario's top familiar despite him. Enjoy yourselves tonight, and steel yourselves for tomorrow. Adventurers, adventure awaits you. That got a positive roar in response. Finn turned to meet Reveria's eyes before doing the same for Gareth. All three of them exchanged nods before looking forward again. It wouldn't be easy, but their resolve was made regardless. Otter, you are Orario's mightiest and you might have taken the next step before us. But we great three shall not lose to you, and our familiar most certainly shall still overcome your own. As the energy of the Loki familiar rose and declarations were made, well, they certainly weren't the only ones becoming worked up. The air of Orario shifted. Familiar's captains made declarations. Plans were made. Expeditions planned. A fire kindled in the breast of every true adventurer, and embers starting to shelter in hopes that they too would come to burst into flame. And so the days passed. Every day had more and more occur. It was like a self-sustaining cycle. The more the top familiars acted, the more everyone else also had to act or be left even further behind than they were before. The guild rushed here and there. Always more to do. More preparations to be made. More expedition plans to review. More adventurers diving every day, and doing so longer and returning with more magic stones and drops to exchange. Even as they knew a new wave of casualties was coming from adventurers pushing their limits, they took it all in their hands in hope that at least as much as possible could be gained. More demands for expedition support. A Palom supporter looked in disbelief at 3 separate contracts before her. Contracts for hiring supporters long-term, with payment and security through the guild. The need of familiars to put as many of their own members into position to push forward suddenly turning even independent supporters, usually only looked at by level 1 adventurers, into valued assets. It seemed impossible to her, and those like her. Yet, it was a lifeline and chance that she had to grasp. More calls for supplies that adventurers needed going out, every merchant suddenly using every supply source they had. The debt-ridden and badly positioned potion shop suddenly found it too approached. Potions were the lifeblood of adventurers, and there just weren't enough. Larger expedition needed entire crates of potions. For familiars which were dipping into reserve funds, the money flowed towards anyone who might be able to provide. More openings for new recruits. New recruitment posters went up in the guild. More familiars making long-term plans, and intent on expansion. After all, it could take years or decades for high-leveled individuals to level up, but some younger could level up every few years. Soon, the recruitment's demands reached further and further beyond Orario, even to little villages. Well, I'll be, Hummies commented, looking over Orario from the city wall, taking it all in alongside the information that was flowing to him from his familiar. I guess even a boring guy like him can create interesting effects. Hummies once had hopes for Otter. When he beat Gluttony, even he had been struck with admiration, but the king was no hero. Not what Hummies wanted. It appeared that even a boring guy could create a sort of inspiration, though simply by setting new standards for strength and making everyone chase his back. Not bad, Otter, he remarked, grinning. I'll give it time for this to develop. Let's see where this goes. What this creates. He then walked away, chuckling as it put him moving away from his cute little captain who now had to run even further after him while calling out for him. And he wasn't alone in that. What a delightful view, a certain goddess of beauty declared from atop Babel Tower. To think that so many souls could gain a new shine. Freya couldn't help licking her lips. From her perch, she was able to look down on the city, her sight allowing her to see far more than buildings or streets. She saw the souls of the city of heroes, and so many were shining anew, like a fire spreading to light up the world. "You did well, my otter," she said as she looked down, gently running her hand through the hair of her strongest child. He was fast asleep, head resting on her lap. He was sleeping often since returning. Even beyond the harshness of the battle, he needed to be in top condition. While he was able to level up, it wasn't something to rush. With level 5, each level took an increasing toll. Increasingly, it became impossible for a person to take the next step. It took both strength of spirit and refinement of body. The closer they stepped the heavens, the more their own vessel threatened to shatter under the power developing inside. It was not a coincidence that only one person had ever reached level 9, and it was a healer that had been called the Immortal. But Otter would most certainly be the second, and continue going. His move to train the Andrimni of all things was rather counterproductive to readying himself for level 8, but he had earned leeway for such flights of fancy, and even then he'd be ready any day now. If anything, she was considering how to properly reward him for his feat after all. The eye of Bela was resting on her mantle. "Not only do you shine, but this time you have made even others shine," she whispered, hand gliding over his cheek. "It appears you continue to surprise me." She looked back out over Orario. "Let's see if anyone else manages to surprise me so too, or whether it will only be you from now on." Conflict was the natural state of the fields of Folkvanga. After all, it was here that the familiar members, under their goddess gaze, sought to prove themselves worthy of representing her. Failing to live up to that standard, even as often whimsical as Lady Freya's opinions were, was not something that was tolerated either. The expectations were not laid out clearly, but were still there, formed by the will of the familiar. No, even that was undercutting the true intensity behind it. It was the will of those most extreme in their devotion and efforts. The ones most determined to gain strength and stand above the pack set the standard, for failing to match them consigned those of weaker will to ignominy. Otter had often heard those unknowingly say within his hearing range that the Freya familiar was filled with maniacs. Otter was not sure he could truthfully disagree, and it was most likely this sort of gradual drift in how they all competed for their goddess approval that led to it. Yet, he did not particularly care. "Gah! Ka!" Otter's small grunt was soon overtaken by Hytha's struggling cry that broke off into a scream. The wooden sword he wielded overpowering the simple mace she'd taken to wielding. The wooden sword connected with her side, but kept going. The body of the 17-year-old adventurer was lifted and tossed back, a blast of wind following her while tearing up the ground to create a small storm of grass and dirt. Her form landed a good 20 meters away, with her soon curling up around her ribs in pain. The others present had a moment of shocked silence as they looked at the soul level 4 among them be tossed away so, their eyes drifting back to Otter in terrified stillness at what a casual, single-armed swing of his did. It made him frown, and so he ordered in a low back, "Andrimni, protect your leader." That prompted them to act. The past days drilling some expectations into them. A good 10 of the 30 members darted at him, all aiming to strike at the same time box him in. Good. It still failed, naturally, but that was hardly the point. Even restricting his speed, fighting alone against greater numbers of enemies was what he was most used to. He slipped to one side, parrying a blade strike and a single punch sending a level 3 10 meters away. Footwork then put him behind another, and a hand grasping the back of their head slammed them face first onto the ground. They kept coming at him, but merely competent teamwork wasn't enough against Otter. A level 3 female weretiger tried to use a shield to defend while trying to grab onto him to weigh him down. Otter used the rebound of his wooden sword off the shield to spin while lowering his center of gravity, ducking under her lunge and striking her in the solar plexus with the hilt. A level 2 male dark elf unleashed a good series of sword swing against him, covering for a level 2 male Hume bunny chanting. Otter met all the blade strikes, deflecting them. Within 3 strikes, he spotted an opening and a quick counterattack missed yet left the fighter off balance and reeling. Allowed Otter to use his foot to flick a rock at the Hume bunny, who suffered ignis fatuus at the disruption. A quick offensive then showed the dark elf was lacking in defense. A half-elf shot an arrow while 2 humans attacked. One of the humans merely level 1 and the elf level 2. Their attack was painfully off balance. The archer was too slow to aim and support his higher-ranked comrades. The second human proved level 3 though, and ended up tossing multiple throwing daggers between strikes. Otter took advantage of the gaps. Deft positioning and a timely dodge left a throwing dagger sinking into the archer's soldier, and reaching for a dagger left an opening in his defense as Otter's strike blew through his flimsy one-handed defense to crack the hand drawing the dagger. When the other human tried to defend, Otter got him in the ankle and then a throw tossed him onto the other. They came one after another, but it didn't take more than 3 exchanges for any to fall. Even limiting himself, the gap in experience stood out, especially against this group, which made up the healers, herbalists, and supporters of the Freya familiar. Amateurish, he muttered, unleashing a stronger strike that once again released a wave of air that sent those closest flying. Their attempts to avoid or mitigate the shockwave, petty. So few had true will behind their strikes. He turned his eyes on the score that had held back, some trying to heal or prepare some assault, but the fear and hesitation in their eyes only emphasized their lacking will. Not fighting shall not help you, Otter told them as he took a step forward. More than his words, it was the step forward that prompted them to act. They launched at him. Desperation and sheer pattern recognition overwhelming their usual instincts in the face of a superior opponent and the habits formed by years as the backline of the familiar. Good. That had been something he'd been aiming for, even if not with words. For the week he'd been training the Andrimni, he had acted a certain way even if never explaining it. If they weren't attacking, he was. They did not want him to attack. Their efforts still failed. Now it was the least combat capable of their number attacking, and twice the number, more since some of the initial attackers had recovered and joined in, did not make up for it. Otter did not understand nor have the patience for any soft training. He expected willpower, the strength to push through hardship, for them to use this combat where he restrained himself as a tool for growth. Growth was rarely easy, and should never be expected to be so. Every second, Otter landed another blow on one of them. Academia Human had her weak grip on her spear broken with a whack of his sword, and then found herself tossed to the ground. A human fell to his knees after a thrust to the solar plexus almost left him puking. He disarmed a human female, and then used the dropped shield as a throwing disc that sent an elf female archer falling to the ground. A Palam panicked and failed when a simple raised leg caught them and made them fall. A level 3 Renard tried to use her body to defend another chanting mage, but a simple push sent her into the mage to break the chant. Again. Most of the Andrimni were struggling on the floor but a minute later. Some clasping injuries. Others were merely gasping on the ground, struck by fear. Most of those standing were chanting spells to try and heal the injured. Or at least trying to appear so, many of them trembling and trying to look anywhere but at him. A few standing were backing away from him, fear once again overcoming them. Otter stared at the sheep demi-human who stood before him with a dagger raised. A simple level 1 that he recognized as an herbalist. Her arms and eyes were trembling, and even Otter didn't know whether it was courage that led her to stay standing against him or her legs simply refusing to move from overwhelming instinct. Good, Otter still said, nodding at her. Whether fear or courage, to remain standing was still important. He still stepped forward, adding, "Yet you must still act." He didn't reach her. He instead had to defend from a quick barrage of strikes. His sword deflected half a dozen mace blows in an instant, a combination far crisper and more experienced than any of the others. He also used the hilt to deflect a punch, and then raised his other to catch the follow-up. Hythe met his gaze, teeth being gritted and golden flames seeming to flicker off of her. "Finally finished your chanting?" he asked her, unsurprised. It was exactly because Hythe was not an opponent to be taken out by the earlier strike that he had done so. The time it took her to reappear made clear her purpose. You need to either be faster or manage a method of movement while doing so, one way or another. "Yes, Captain," she gritted out, jumping back to make a short distance. It allowed Otter to make a point of looking at the others. All of the fallen Andrimni were rising, wounds disappearing the same golden flames as Hythe till both were gone. Not a single magic circle. So, Earth Gulvaig, he commented, looking back at Hythe. The sustained, automatic healing of this spell was much more demanding in mind than the single instance healing of Zeo Gulvaig. "Are you going to attack?" Hythe didn't answer, but she resignedly made a stance that made clear it was so. The others were also doing the same. The protection of arguably the most protective and invulnerable healing spell being applied to them by their leader leading to another burst of resigned courage. Otter nodded, raising his sword as he intoned stoically. Good. The most important aspects of combat for healers is willpower and endurance. Others need to worry about avoiding injuries. The better your healing, the less you need to be the same. Mind capacity, physical endurance, and the sheer will to keep fighting in the face of pain and fear is what determines when you drop. Hone those into something unbreakable, and you shall remain standing. He knew this, as he himself arguably utilized such abilities in battle when Stortus Otter provided him healing power. Hytha's eyes weren't as dead as they usually were, but only due to sheer ire as she growled out at him. Stop putting your own ridiculous standards on others. Otter stared at her. Make me, Vana Mardol. That caused her to yowl like a cat demi-human and jump at him, forcing the others to follow. What is this? Did we get attacked when we were gone? No, is that Dash Otter? And Hythe? The healers too. What the hell did he do to them? As members of the Freya familia started to trickle back into the familiar home of Folkvanga, they were struck by what they came to find. Even beaten and exhausted from an impromptu week in the dungeon with little preparation, they couldn't help it. The scene was enough for them to delay some much-needed healing, eating, and resting. Their captain, the king that had recently qualified to level up, standing before a war zone where the familiar's healers were strewn about. Otter himself noted them, but turned back to where Hythe was on her knees. Breathing as if she was about to die, she still managed to raise a hand to wipe again her bloody nose and gasp out, "T there. People are coming back. They'll need healing, and like this we can't even heal ourselves, much less others. Are you satisfied, you maniac captain?" Otter stared for a moment, before asking softly, "Are you?" What?" she demanded, much less softly. "Are you satisfied with what you have managed here?" Otter asked simply. "I am a healer," Hythe said, gasping out and body sinking. "All of us are. The fields of Folkvanga are not for us to train. Not anymore. This is our role. Healers." Otter merely said, the humming growl coming from deep into his throat. "Gather tomorrow at noon for me." Despite the implication of more training, the time given still made the ones still cognizant enough to listen slump in relief. Considering it was only approaching evening today, that was the longest break he's given them all week. For the first 4 days, he'd spent 12 hours every day training them. The last 3 days, he trained them for 18 hours a day. Admittedly, not all of them. Between the unavoidable differences in stamina, experience, and expectations inherent in a group like this alongside their numbers, some were able to handle more and switches occurred. He'd left that to Hythe to organize, as their leader. So long as they kept up a number that were also exerting proper effort, he allowed them their time to rest. Admittedly, it was the second requirement that caused them the most trouble. Exerting proper effort. As earlier had shown, putting 100% of your effort into something and resisting mental fatigue was difficult. While there wasn't a first-class adventurer alive who hadn't had to fight a day and a night without rest, even that didn't mean they put in full effort. An inability to put your full focus and effort into something for long periods of time was an unavoidable limitation. The sort of willpower necessary to surpass your limits even more so. That didn't mean one couldn't hone their mental power, however. An important thing to do too, as it was often in moments of mental weakness or lacking focus that critical mistakes were made. As he'd already decided that he intended to hone their mental focus alongside their physical endurance, he had obviously targeted such moments. Such weaknesses. If they didn't attack him, he would attack them. If they didn't put proper effort and focus into attacking him, he punished them. If they lost their will entirely, he would seek out the other members of the Andrimni. To straddle that line between pushing their physical and mental states to the limit, but not outright breaking their will. Even Otter knew that the past week had no doubt been hellish for the entirety of their number that had grown used to not being on the fields of Folkvanga themselves. Yet, he did not shy away from the effort. "Tomorrow, Vana Mardol," he told her, turning around to look at the newly returned Freya familiar members. Roughly a week after just about every fighter in the familiar had surged to the dungeon with frustrated indignation in their hearts. About what he expected. Even with Rivera offering supplies, he doubted many of the familiar utilized such. No, they didn't go down there to make money. They went down there to vent their frustrations, push themselves even a step further on their journeys. Merely grabbing what food and potions they could, they went down to fight until they couldn't fight anymore. A week sounded right for the third-class members of their familia. "Only come forward if you have a serious wound," Otter declared loudly, enough for his voice to spread across the large familiar grounds. The Andrimni have training of their own. If you cannot manage your fitness yourselves, that is now the lesson you need to learn. I expect Varna Mardol to have the time and energy to push herself. None in this familiar are to be denied the opportunity to seek strength, even the healers and supporters. This is non-negotiable. Understood. Whatever their feelings towards him, all the fighters listening snapped to and answered, "Sir." Otter nodded and walked inside, ignoring Hytha's weak glower at his back. He was soon within the washroom, allowing cold water to run over his body. Made no difference to him. He was more focused on using a hand to run along his body, pressing and touching every muscle and bone. He was properly healed now. The battle against Bela had left him on the precipice of death, despite his victory. He'd dragged himself out of the dungeon with broken bones, torn muscles, torn and bleeding skin, so deprived of mind that every thought made him feel like blacking out, and a bone-deep exhaustion that almost left his heart about to stop. The fact that the other executives had attacked him upon his return hardly helped. Healing spells and potions hadn't been enough to ameliorate it all entirely. He'd slept 18 hours right after, and over 10 for the next 4 days. The last 3 he'd restricted himself to 5 to ensure his body could handle some light stress. Training the Andrimni had also slowed his healing down, but it was over now. "I am ready," he said to himself, turning the water off. The wait was over. He slept well that night, allowing himself some luxury in sleeping as long as desired. He woke with the dawn, however. Dressing quickly, he went to the kitchen. The Andrimni number who served as cooks paled at the sight of him, but the other non-familiar member cooks were used to him and merely made way. Otter worked quickly. Flour, milk, salt. He kneaded the dough, before moving and chopping a wide array of nuts, seed, and other fillings. Mixing them in, he cooked into a hard-tack biscuit. He ignored the cooks' shaking heads at his result, merely wrapping them up. He then returned to his room, stashing the food into a pack. He went through the other essentials quickly. Once that was done, he put his redded pack away. He then turned to the closet where he kept his weapons. He eyed the remains of the supreme black sword, but shook off any regret. It had served admirably when he needed it. He instead focused on what he could use, drawing them one by one to examine them. A broadsword. Solid, but left behind when he went to face Bela for a reason. It likely wouldn't have survived Judeus once it drew its sword, much less Bela. Still, workable for the short term. Dual blades. Both sized to where others might consider them broadsword, but several characteristics marked them so. His preferred weapon types against other adventurers. A few odds and ends in terms of weapons. Daggers. Several hatchets. Spikes he could drive by hand into enemies. No battle-axe though. Nor a hammer. Both of those he'd taken against the Judeus, and not a weapon survived. He turned to his armor. A small breastplate only meant to cover his heart. Gauntlets to allow some unarmed deflection and parrying. Once again, not things he took against the Judeus, as his own defense was probably superior than what they could offer, but something he wore out of habit. Preferred habit, at least. While he had surpassed what most equipment available could withstand, and that was going to get worse today, he could sustain a vain hope that eventually the smiths might close the gap and provide something he could trust. Unlikely, but possible and very much preferable. Until then, he would continue carrying many weapons and relying little on armor as he could trust neither. Inventory complete, Otter moved to a series of chests that he also had. He opened one to review the ores he kept inside. Adamantite mainly, but also some mithril and orichalcum. The 2 years he'd had to wait to face Bela had been tedious and far from inspiring, but none could say he hadn't at least used the time to build up some reserves of funds and materials. Satisfied, he closed the chest before picking up 2 of them, hefting them onto his shoulders, and leaving. The front desk attendant at the Goibnu familiar workshop froze at the sight of Otter entering. Otter dropping the heavy chests right onto the counter got him moving though, while also making others in the workshop look. Or, Otter said simply, it being enough to explain everything. The captain master, they called him of the familiar that came to the front while commenting. So, you're making some custom orders? Should have expected it after you had a great feat, a breaker. Otter did not respond to the unofficial nickname the Goibnu familiar gave him for how often he broke weapons, instead informing him stoically. Yes, but I also need purchase some first-class equipment. That's going to be troublesome, the mustached old man commented. What are you looking for? A great hammer and a great axe. First class. Regretfully, no can do, the man claimed though. We've had just about all our stock purchased in the past few days. Every first-class piece of equipment, not a showpiece, is being purchased. We have a war hammer we had prepped for Dvalin, but you just purchased that war axe a month ago and Borling bought a replacement for his 2 weeks ago. Otter gave a displeased hum, but didn't say anything. What orders do you want? Otter quickly gave a prepared order. A replacement greatsword, dual greatswords, war hammer, war axe, gauntlets, greaves, small breastplate. The works, heh, the smith muttered. He sighed. Unfortunately, it will take some time. Alongside our stock being empties, orders have come in. A lot of them. I can prioritize a few pieces considering, but I can't claim with integrity to be able to have them ready by our usual time standards. But there might be a solution, another smith said, sliding in with a large smile at Otter. Despite the blank gaze he received in return. It is only fair that we give a congratulatory present for reaching level 8. I am sure we can work something out. Especially since I doubt your need for equipment is going to decrease. I am sure we can work something out. Otter just looked at him a moment before looking back to the master and saying bluntly, I'll place an order what you can manage and look elsewhere. Otter's errands hardly went different throughout the morning. He had to go to several other options for equipment. One shop that represented the mags of Altina. Another that took orders from the dwarf kingdom of Vol-Lodi, which had a quality smithing familiar. Both acted the same way. Not a surprise though. For all Otter knew, he had a reputation for breaking all his equipment. He also ensured they could be replaced where possible. He did not ask for any complicated enchantments, and usually brought in the ores and drops needed to forge them. Simple yet quality equipment that could be pumped out quickly was what he sought, and it was good business to anyone he went to. Sabaki Colbrand was not alone in seeking exclusivity from him in terms of equipment supply. It wasn't only smiths that acted so either though. Here you go, King, Diensect said loudly, laughing happily as he put the box before Otter and opened it for him. Inside was several bottles as well as a bag and other containers. 3 elixirs, 1 high mind potion, and a moly potion. Quality unsurpassed, I assure you. They're bottles too. We also have a bag from the deformis spider silk you provided. It has multiple compartments with protection and softening enchantments provided from Mayan Decent's mystery. Even on your hip, you need not worry about any of these breaking. Nothing short of a direct attack of a first-class adventurer or equivalent monster would manage that. Otter nodded and asked, the cost? 2,100,000 valis, even after the materials you provided, Dien informed, although rubbed his hands together as he said. But we can work out a deal. You need such things, and I'm sure you'll be reaching new floors with all kinds of new plants and drops that we would be happy to utilize for your benef. 2,100,000 valis. Otter said as he dropped the amount of the table, grabbed the items, and was out of there before the god could blink. It was tiring. He still had more to do though. Valka's Crimson Chambers, the familiar home of the Hephaestus familiar, was surprisingly silent as Otter arrived, but that was not his concern. He was quickly sent where he needed to go to. He soon knocked on the office before him, and a voice called out, clearly having been alerted to him, I would have preferred an appointment, but I suppose I can grant you at least this. Enter. Otter wasn't bothered by the response, and instead walked in and met the eye of goddess Hephaestus, who smirked. Sir Otter, I suppose congratulations are in order, the goddess said, smirk still there. Level 8. I am shocked and impressed. I did not expect it. You were informed of my intent towards Bela, Otter replied simply, although his gaze did harden. Informed others too. Once you declare yourself like that, you give up the right to secrecy. You did not say for me to remain quiet, Hephaestus pointed out, chuckling. Although I did not expect you to succeed either, so you did get one over on me. I hope you can be satisfied with that. Otter merely stared. The goddess started back, still smiling. Truly, a goddess who knew her and her familiar were about as untouchable as Orario would allow. Why are you two staring at each other like that? Otter had noted the additional presence in the room, but he'd only had eyes for Hephaestus so far. That voice calling out clearly broke it now. Even the goddess' shoulders slumped, the tension cut. He turned to look at the speaker. It was another goddess. That was undeniable, despite the less than impressive state. Many gods and goddesses were so, after all, but their auras always made clear. This goddess was at a side table, half sprawled in a chair. Black hair and blue eyes were immediately apparent, alongside a white dress. She was also short, and had a bottle of wine in her hand, which her eyes flickered to before looking back at Otter. The slight flush in her face made clear it was at least partially empty. Otter did not recognize her, which rather said a lot despite his disinterest, as he often accompanied Lady Freya to the god banquets. Hestia, Hephaestus groaned out, grasping her head. Tension gone. I know I let you stay, but couldn't you have just kept quiet or gone in the other room like I suggested? You've already been bumming around for over 3 months now, and you decide to do this. It's been a week where I've been distracted, but we have to have a much-needed talk. Ah, it's fine. It's fine, the goddess claimed as she stood and marched before Otter. Straightening up proudly, she puffed out her chest before declaring, I am Hestia, goddess of hearth and home, descended to create the strongest familiar to ever exist. Large talk from someone who hasn't even tried to recruit someone since she descended, Hephaestus muttered. Well, it's not like I'm such a bad friend that I'd try to recruit your children. But now that someone is visiting, Hestia said brashly, before turning back to Otter. Crossing her arms and nodding confidently, she continued, Otter, was it? What do you say to joining my familiar? I'm sure we're going to take off any day now. Once we get going, we'll go straight to the top. Goddess intuition. Otter stared at the small goddess before him blankly, which she clearly felt intimidated by, as she started trembling while muttering, Wow, you're tall. Thought the wine was making me see wrong, but... Otter still stared. This was not what he expected when coming here, and he didn't know how to feel about it, beyond obvious disdain for any concept of betraying Lady Freya. Hestia, just sit down, Hephaestus tiredly said. Actually, apologize first and then sit down. What? Why? Think clearly. I know you've been spending more time eating on my couch than anything, but think through the alcohol, the divine smith said in a slow voice, as if to a child. Think about why the last week has been busy, and what names you've heard, Otter. It took a full 5 seconds for the goddess to light up. Oh yeah, you're the one that leveled up. The king. Of the Freya familiar, the goddess said, trailing off as it came to her. Apparently even she felt chagrined as she realized what she'd done, although she only knocked her head softly before continuing. Aha, sorry. My bad. I should probably apologize to Freya. Haven't seen her since I came down. Because you've been hiding out like a NEET. That's because Loki No-Tits started teasing me. And this is going to change that. Otto often found himself befuddled by social situations, so he at least was used to moving on when he didn't understand. Goddess Hestia, I think Lady Freya mentioned you once recently. She claimed she wanted to welcome you to the lower world. Not sure if that's a good thing, coming from Freya. She can be whimsical, the goddess said, making Otter's frown deepen. But I'll still visit. We just aren't from the same area, so I'm unused to seeing her except coincidentally. She tends to like to play around at such times. I will gladly hand you off to Freya, Hephaestus moaned, hands on her face. Hephaestus tilde. Just sit back down, the divine smith ordered, pointing at the chair. The goddess sat back down sulkily. The one he actually came to see now turned back to him and bluntly continued. Now, is there a reason you came to me? Deciding there was no reason to be anything but blunt, Otter informed her, I wish to request a custom order from you. Rejected, the goddess denied without hesitation, smiling again. Just like the other times you've asked. He stared, but barreled on. You informed the Loki familiar of both the Udeus drop and my intent to face Bela. I did, but this and that are entirely different things, she retorted, smirking again. One can call that revenge for forcing Tsubaki and some of my kids to face the Udeus for your own desires. You then actually told Tsubaki to focus on leveling up. Now, there might be benefits of both that I can acknowledge, but you interfered with my familiar. It feels like you touched my things without permission. It's not polite to do such to a lady, Sir Otter. Otter, like many times, did not know how to respond to that. As for my forging a weapon, she continued, looking at him with her single eye half-lidded. That's just a personal standard. Even if I held back, a weapon forged by me would be a cheat for an adventurer. It's not something I'd do without some enticing reasons. And what would such reasons be? Otter asked. What do I need to do? Not quite what I meant, but if you are insistent, the divine smith replied, leaning forward with a smile again. It's a secret tilde. I can't make it so easy, Sir Otter, even in light of your leveling up. I see, Otter said, face blank. I shall leave you then, Lady Hephaestus. Oh, are you going to make any other orders from my familiar members? Unfortunately, no, Lady Hephaestus, Otter answered, locking eyes with her. I placed orders elsewhere, and I am not in the mood anymore. As untouchable as the Hephaestus familiar, and as little as Otter usually cared for such things. Even Otter felt at times that he needed to make his displeasure known. Not even this familiar could demand he give them business. "Thank you for your time, Lady Hephaestus," Otter said, giving her a polite bow before turning and starting away. "That's good," Hephaestus said though, refreshing smile on her face that made him stop in his retreat. "Tsubaki is actually already in the dungeon, leading some of our level 1s and weaker 2s. We've also got several expeditions being planned. You really motivated her, so we'll be on limited production for a while. We wouldn't have been able to meet your orders anyway, Sir Otter." Otter looked over his shoulder at the goddess for several seconds. She gave a beatific smile, saying, "Thank you for your time, Sir Otter." "Understood," Otter finally said as he continued walking. "Bye-bye," Hestia let out, voice cheerful from the drink. "I'll visit Freya soon, K." Otter left feeling frustrated anew. Admittedly, it was better than the way the other familiars had acted, even if he knew not how. Still, her smile at the end irked him. People often left him confused and frustrated, however, so it was best he got moving. Well, after picking up one more thing, Demeter came quite quickly. It was expected. The rest of her familiar kept their distance whenever he showed up at their land outside the walls of Orario. Not a surprise. To a familiar made solely of level 1s, farmers at that whose fauna were more declarative than anything, Otter was practically a monster. They only relaxed when she was watching over him. "Time to pick another one, it appears," she commented lightly as she came to a halt next to him. "Yes," Otter answered simply, not looking away. He instead kept his eyes and attention on the numerous flower bushes. His hands also kept moving, not even needing tools to cut off the dead bits to shape the bushes and keep them healthy. The flower maintenance was done in but minutes, despite the large section he was in. "You've gotten better at that," the goddess of agriculture said with a giggle. "I still remember the way you all but randomly tore off pieces when you were still small. Even I can pick out obvious signs of ill health," Otter claimed, eyes still examining. He then pointed at one, asking, "This one?" Demeter let out, hesitating as her smile grew strained. "How about this one?" Otter nodded, looking at the one she pointed to. "I do not see a difference, Lady Demeter." "You will one day," the goddess said, lifting her hands into fists before her chest as she tried to show an encouraging energy. "I believe in you, Otter." Otter didn't respond to that. Much like with cooking, gardening was a hobby he had picked up. As a child, both Mia and Freya had told him about hobbies and how they were important. These were two that he picked up, despite hardly seeing the point. He kept them up too, found purposes for them, made his own rations for the dungeon, picked only the most beautiful flower in the entire section he maintained to present to Freya when the time called for it. Not even his own lack of talent had either prevented it. Going on 25 years of gardening, and not once had Demeter ever approved his choice of flower to present to Freya. Otter truly just didn't understand some things others took for granted. "I thank you regardless, Lady Demeter," Otter said after he picked the flower, bowing to the goddess. "Your assistance is invaluable." "It is no trouble," she replied back, giggling still. "It also allows me to see a cute side to you. That's rare, Mr. King." Otter let out, his only response to yet another thing he didn't know how to react to. "I shall have need of you for the next few weeks." "No problem. Your flowers will be kept in tip-top shape. My promise." Finally, only an hour or so to noon, Otter walked back into Folkvanga. Preparations done. Flower clasped behind his back. And so he walked all the way to the highest point to knock on the door there. "Come in, Otter," a smooth voice called out, expectations in her voice. He entered. Lady Freya laying on her side on a lounge chair, head propped up on one hand. She was wearing a white dress that revealed the beauty of her figure and skin generously. He got close to bow, Lady Freya. "My dear Otter," she replied, looking over him with a smile hinting at much hidden knowledge. "Oh, what might you be holding behind your back?" "A gift, Lady Freya," he said as he handed her the flower. "Oh, how beautiful," she said, taking it with a smile despite this having been done countless times before. Although maybe exactly because of that, her smile turned melancholic. "So, it is time." "It is, my lady." "Must you?" "Yes." Her eyes turned to him, but finally she nodded and ordered, "Then remove your shirt and kneel." Otter did so. A week he had spent recovering, allowing his body to heal from the ordeal that was a grand feat at his level. A battle with Bela that had literally altered the entire floor and broken through to the 50th floor. A week in which all Orario reacted to his victory. It was time he properly leveled up to 8, and then go back into the dungeon for the next adventure. He felt her fingers touch his back. The soft warmth of her blood etched onto his skin. Her power sinking further to create a bridge between his soul and her will. I shall finish up any final touch-ups of your status as a level 7, she spoke, voice brisk and serious now that we were at this point. Bare few points for agility and dexterity, a bit more for magic. Oh Tilda, you have progressed in your skills. Otter hummed. Otter knew not how it was for other familiar. He obviously had no personal experience with another god, and the rumor mill of Orario was quite unreliable. In Lady Freya's case at least, she could use her ability to see the soul to spot developing skills and spells. Watch their growth to hopefully proper manifestation. The one that's been developing since you were level 5 has progressed again. First time since you fought Zold, she explained, referencing the skill that had been developing for over 15 years by this point. Still not complete yet. A second skill has started developing too. This one feels smaller, however. I believe it is related to your developmental abilities. It feels similar to Stortus Otter. Otter took that in silently. Your second spell has also finally progressed too. The first time since you became level 6, although honestly it's more of a twitch. That made Otter frown. Unlike spells, one only had limited spell slots. That meant only a single spell was able to develop at a time. Otter had developed a second spell slot as a level 3, and a spell had started developing. As a level 5, a stronger spell had replaced it, only to summarily stop developing, only taking up the slot. He had long since given up on gaining a second spell because of it, so to hear even a slight progression. What experience or thought recently had finally managed to touch that stagnant spell? Much more quantifiable gains in developmental abilities, Freya said, voice pleased and smug. Your magic resistance went up to E, and crush went up to F. That pleased him too, especially right before leveling up. While it was less of a strict limit, one could only efficiently gain so many ranks in developmental abilities per level. At some point, it just took more and more. He also hadn't improved them as much as hoped as a level 7, so 2 final rank ups was pleasing news. Starting the level up, Freya said, her voice serious again. Prepare yourself. Only 2 gods had ever done a level up to 8, and now Freya was to become the 3rd. Otter breathed, and with that breath came a hurricane. Power, a golden flood that ran through his body. His own soul getting swept up and expanded. It was enough to overwhelm a regular man 10 times over. Not Otter though. He had prepared for this. He had prepared himself. Years spent building himself up diligently. So, he just took deep breaths. Stopped caring about time, and merely kept his body calm and accepting the new power. Slowly brought it under control. His soul raging against the tide that would sweep it away. Eventually, he opened his eyes. Congratulations, Otter. Freya all but purred, her own satisfaction surpassing even his own. You are officially level 8. He breathed out. Thank you, Lady Freya. Now, we still have more to do, she continued, still smug even as her fingers moved again and more of her power sank into his soul. You have no small amount of Excelia suited for improving your strength and endurance basic abilities. Should I? No, my lady, he denied. I must accustom myself to the base abilities of level 8. I have received enough of a boost. We can increase it further once I've adapted. Yes, Tilda. Your 3rd spell slot has been unlocked, and a spell has already started developing. That surprised him. Although, it also made sense. While spell slots were limited and it was extremely common for adventurers to not have 3, it was rarer when a low-leveled adventurer did have all 3. One could unlock them by a variety of measures. Grimoires and leveling up were the most common. He had gained 1 at level 3, so he was aware of that. Unlocking a 3rd followed the pattern. It was just that the sheer magnitude of reaching the highest of levels ensured that getting more slots at level 7, 8, or 9 was not something anyone relied upon due to practical considerations. Good, was the only thing he could say. Now, for your developmental abilities. I assume you want to take a new one. Yes, was his immediate response. Most higher-leveled adventurers eventually had a level where they didn't gain a DA. It was partly as it was genuinely possible to not earn one, if your abilities didn't align well. More often, it was a purposeful choice. The efficiency of ranking them up decreased the more you had already done so inside a level.
If an adventurer fell behind as a level 5 or 6, it was sensible to not adding a DA that would benefit you less than properly raising your core ones. It was a common move, even if many had lost an understanding of the actual reasons. Otter had been told personally, though, by there are 5 core aspects of an adventurer, my little piggy. He banished the thought, and forced his mind back on track. Otter hadn't gotten one when he leveled up to 7 at the Great Feud. It was unfortunate. He had kept up with his DAs, but the circumstance of when Lady Freya did it before the monsters arrived prevented a talk on it. She had defaulted to the common practice and speed over just giving him one. It was a mistake. An understandable one that he would never blame her for, but still a mistake. It would not be repeated here. Developmental abilities were important, more than many adventurers gave them credit for. While most often less dramatic than skills or spells, they were reliable. Each one practically a minor skill that could be reliably gained and improved if they fit the adventurer. Especially at higher levels, DAs started mattering more, in his opinion. "What are my options, my lady?" he asked. "Let's see. You yet can obtain healing power and spirit healing." "Fist strike too," she murmured in response, exploring whatever intangible space provided the gods the information inside the fauna. You obtained the basic qualifications for Tamer, but like mixing, the basic qualifications are not enough anymore. Not a surprise either. Another reason higher levels often skipped a DA was as the options did get smaller. What you could get at 2 or 3 stopped when you got higher. Too minor compared to your proper abilities to be imprinted upon your status anymore. Oh, you also qualify for spirit pleasure. That's. Zeus and Hera had provided records of many DAs, both common and rare. Both requirements and effects. Some they kept to themselves, though. Otter himself only knew due to who he had known, and he knew only of the 2 that had spirit pleasure before their fall. The Silence, Althea. The Empress, Syria. It was a DA that was only available at later levels. So the Empress had gotten it at level 6. Althea at level 7. What its effects were was unknown to him. All he got was that it was one that affected body constitution in some way. Like Strong Body, which was itself a rare and valued DA that had once had Zeus try to recruit him as a new level 3. Otter had not expected this. So, he merely grunted and asked, "What about Supreme Fist?" "No, not available." That was frustrating, as that was his hope. Supreme Fist and Supreme Light were 2 matching DAs, only available past level 5. They allowed the vast enhancement of a single strike at the cost of a great amount of stamina and a long cooldown. Physical blows for the former, and magic spells for the latter. A DA earned by those who managed to defeat great foes in single, great strikes. Zold's use of Supreme Fist had been what allowed him to defeat Otter in a single blow in their first clash during the feud, and had sent Otter to his knees the second time. They had been valuable enough that the Zeus familiar had all but tailored their fighting styles to try and finish opponents in a single blow. Otter also understood the value. While an endurance-based fighter, he was not immune to wishes to be able to wipe out stubborn opponents in one burst. It would have very nicely filled what he considered a lack of such overwhelming, burst strike power. Although it was probably exactly that which prevented him from earning it. Skills or spells could grant one's wishes, at times. DAs were not so. They were what an adventurer was and did, not what they hoped to be or wanted to do. They didn't fill in what you lacked, but enhanced what you had. So, your options are healing power, spirit healing, fist strike, and... Freya spoke, only for her voice to turn stuff as she no doubt remembered who had once had the final option. Spirit pleasure. Which do you seek, Otter? Otter had considered this plenty beforehand, even with the preferred option not available. Healing power and spirit healing were out. While he valued both immensely, Stortus Otter made this decision the best. It granted him both, and enhanced all his DAs. Healing power's automatic healing at the cost of mind and spirit healing's mind regeneration had been so essential for his endurance-based combat build, and the torturous training he'd done as a level 5, that he gained them by skill. Now, he did only gain them to a degree, based on his level. It was, at least previously, the equivalent of H rank. He would love to have either of those to a higher rank, but the skill also enhanced all his DAs so long as he was in battle. Another DA simply was more efficient. Fist strike was what he had decided on. It was a basic and common DA, but reliable, enhancing the blows of particularly powerful unarmed strikes. Simple, but with how often Otter's weapons had proven not able to live up to his physical capabilities, of only more importance with his level up. Spirit pleasure threw a twist into such thoughts. A relatively DA with effects he didn't know, and some DAs were far harder to raise in rank than others, but one that was rare and a high-level exclusive one. One didn't even need to remark on its previous users, and what that implied about it. The reliable choice that fit his current difficulties, or the rare and unknown one that was a gamble. Otto marched out of his goddess chambers resolved. He went to his room, calmly put on his usual adventuring outfit, strapped the kit of rations and potions he had previously prepared to his belt. He then went into his armory, and loaded himself up with all that he could carry. A broadsword, dual blades, a war hammer. He slipped a small hatchet onto his belt as replacement for a proper axe. 6 spikes went into holders on his waist. He slipped on gauntlets, greaves, and his small breastplate. By the time he left, Otto was armored for war against the dungeon. Those who saw him also knew it, and cleared the way. It wasn't till he stepped out the front door and saw the gathered Andrimni that he stopped his purpose-filled walk. He looked up at the sky. Noon. Exactly as timed. "See, Captain," Hythe said as she saw him. "Varna Mardol," he returned, then looking at the rest. "Andrimni, I am heading into the dungeon. I shall check upon return, but for now, your training with me is complete. It is now up to you." That seemed to leave them baffled, shock and confusion also showing on their faces. We're done?" Hythe asked. "For now," he answered, looking at her. "I expect your own efforts to continue, however. Especially you, Varna Mardol. I intend to have you step up when our familiar has secured a round against the Goliath." "That again," she retorted, her short-lived relief replaced by frustration again as her hands curled into fists. "I know the Eudeus and Bela had hidden techniques and drops if faced alone, but there's no guarantee the Goliath will too. And why me? I'm a healer. It's not my role to fight like this." Otto stared for a moment, finally telling her bluntly, "None other is more suitable for this than you. Of that, I am sure." You can't be talked to," she burst out, tugging on her twin tails. "You're a maniac with no understanding of other people." Probably true, but Otto was unmoved regardless. "Continue training," he told them, eyes sweeping over the group of healers. "We in this familiar seek strength enough to not bring disgrace to our goddess. That includes you all. I want everyone to keep progressing. I ask not total obedience nor respect, but I shall not accept complacency." Hythe let out again, but finally just seemed to give up. Her dead eyes once again showed. "If you expect such from us, you should at least give proper advice. You haven't done anything but rampage against us in spas this entire week." Otto frowned at that. Honestly, he figured that the best way. It was how he had once been trained too, as unpleasant as it was. If anything, he hadn't strapped magic items onto them that he shook off that thought again. If he had to give some advice though, with what he just did, "Work on your developmental abilities," he ordered them. "Too few specifically train them, and such will have a cost. You should expect to only be able to rank them up a certain amount of times efficiently each level." What should they be?" He turned to Hythe and questioned, "Which do you have, and at what rank?" It was outrageous to ask publicly like this. Most aspects of status were carefully guarded, but Hythe just sighed and gave in by answering, "Mage, rank G, healing power, rank I, healing, rank G." Otto stared. She bristled, exclaiming indignantly, "I was not a dedicated healer when I got healing power." Deciding to just ignore the person with potentially the most efficient healing spell having a passive healing ability, Otto explained, "You are not unacceptable, but your goal should still be to raise healing power to H or one of the other two to F. Stop healing yourself with your spell, for the former. For the latter, seek to learn concurrent chanting." He turned to the rest. Level 2s should have theirs to H before trying to level up, and level 3s should have both as H or one at G, preferably both, he elaborated. Skills and spells are signs of talent, passion, and experience, but developmental abilities illustrate effort. They are what you can control, and become increasingly important as you level up. That got them looking at each other, unsure. Although eventually a level 1 raised their hand and asked, "And how about us level 1s? Otto stared, finally asking, "What do you need advice on?" Most were silent, but one eventually spoke up. "What should we do if we are struggling against killer ants?" Some looked away awkwardly at asking such a thing to Otto, but he merely answered bluntly, "Switch weapons. Goblins, kobolds, and other early monsters are simple. Any weapon can be used. Killer ants are the first enemy with a high defense against a certain weapon type the dungeon throws at you, but far from the last. If you intend to specialize in a specific weapon, your answer to such should always be tactics and skill. The worst thing you can do is overly raise your stats, for then you haven't done either and you shall not always have the advantage of being able to overwhelm an enemy. There were far too many adventurers who fell into that trap, amateur swordsmen, that overestimated their actual skill by not properly assessing their basic abilities in relation to enemies. Otto continued his explanation, not needing to pause or think. If you have neither the talent nor inclination to specialize in a specific weapon, you need to gain basic capabilities in multiple weapons. You then need to be ready to use the appropriate weapon for the appropriate enemy. This is what I did. As a level 1, whenever I finished a floor, I refused to descend lower nor update my fauna until I completed that floor with an array of weapons. Otto did not carry so many weapons without intending to use them all. With that answered and seemingly none other with the courage to ask their level 8 captain any further questions, Otto nodded and started away as he said, I shall reach the 59th floor. The longer till I return, the deeper I have succeeded in going. Nothing else needed to be said. The 44th floor of the dungeon was a harsh place. Almost like the inside of a volcano. Pure black rock, multiple areas glowing red from heat. The red light the only thing lighting the area up. And then one got to the monsters. On these floors, the dungeon had one strategy. Numbers. Dozens of flame rocks were grouped together, ready to hunt as a group any mortal presence that appeared. The walls ready to spawn more and more too. The unlucky or ill-prepared often found themselves facing an army. A mere annoyance to Otto before. Now as a level 8, they weren't even that. Otto didn't even slow down, nor did he draw a weapon to strike. He just kept running, in a straight line. The rock-like monsters merely found themselves eviscerated as he ran right through them, their bodies rendered into pebbles and limbs that flew off. The same repeated as he descended further. Every monster was run right over by his form, too weak to even serve as obstacles. Fomoir and other level 4 monsters burst and shatter into blood and ash. Otto only slowed when he reached the 49th floor. The Moitura yet bore signs of his battle with Bela. The giant hole blown to the 50th floor had closed, but nothing else. The ground still rent by their struggle. Craters blown open by the monster wrecks. The great canyon carved across most of the floor from where Bela's greatest attack cleaved the earth. The once flat floor had been turned into rough terrain, and the dungeon had yet to fix it despite an entire week passing. It made Otto frown, but he decided it was not an immediate concern, and so he descended further, through the safe floor on the 50th floor, into the labyrinth that had so long confounded him. It had only taken him a single day to descend this far. It was a major improvement. With wagons, the same often took a week. It was only expected though. With Bela defeated, the dungeon had nothing to the 50th floor that could threaten him anymore. Not that such changed a great deal on the 51st floor. He at least felt it necessary to draw a weapon, however. A single swing slew the black rhinos and other weak level 5 monsters in each corridor of the labyrinth. The dungeon could throw 1,000 monsters at him, and he'd be able to cut through any on one side and escape. It was such certainty that made him make a move he had previously held back from. On the 53rd floor, the floor grew red. He immediately flipped away, avoiding the fireball that tore upwards to collapse the floor. A great hole created that went multiple floors down. The work of the Valgang dragons on the 58th floor that were the great menace of this territory to groups of adventurers by threatening to split them up. Otto jumped down, dual swords in hand. It was a foolish move. Anyone that survived the dungeon could tell you that returning to the surface was often the truly dangerous part of any delve. The dungeon loved waiting till you were tired and low on supplies, and then swarming you as soon as you stopped going down and tried to turn around. The Valgang dragons offered a path right to potentially the 58th floor, bypassing multiple floors' labyrinthine floors. Yet anyone who actually took it would find that they now had to fight upwards against hordes of monsters that would stream from the unculled floors they had skipped. Monsters of the 58th now pursuing them from the rear too. Even as a level 7, Otto had refrained from such in favor of fighting down the old-fashioned way. Now, he was in no mood for caution or patience. Sterling compassion, golden plains. As he fell, he started his chant. It is my fate to serve as a brute of war. Run through, carrying the divine will of the goddess. The horde was waiting as he landed. A whole host of monsters gathered in an army, swarming towards him. Behind them too were the Valgang dragons. Oddly fat dragons without wings. Ruby red. Yet they came down from how they'd been perched on their hind legs, flaming mouths pointed up. Now they turned towards him, their mouths heating up. The artillery ready to blast him even if their own horde was caught in the midst. Otter didn't care. Hildy's Vini. He was covered in gold, his blade encased and pulsing in the power of his magic. He was raging. He swung, and a wave of gold flew with the shockwave of his strike, a hurricane unleashed. He stood before the stairs down further. The 59th floor. This was not the first time he had reached here. Multiple times, he had fought down here, found these stairs, been tempted to descend further. It would have been a hollow move though. He never had the food to properly stay longer. It would have been little more than peeking onto the floor, fighting for a few hours. Forced to turn back not from difficulty, but food. No. Otter had decided how he would level up, and it was on the 49th floor. Only after that would he descend. Descend with the full intention of properly challenging the glacier territory. And the day had come. He stepped onto the stairs and started to descend. There was no way for him to mistake when he entered the 59th floor. The blast of cold air announced it pretty damn well. It was something that chilled the blood in an instant. I hate the cold, Otter muttered, unwelcome memories of back when he didn't have a name brought to the surface. He was soon distracted. After all, light soon attacked him as well. After the dull grays and dim light of the labyrinth floors, it really did feel like an attack. Although he soon adapted and was able to look around properly. The glacier territory. As the name implied, there was a lot of snow. Most everything was white. Although as he looked closer, he saw the slight blue of the sky the dungeon was mimicking. In the distance, he also saw ice breaking up to reveal water. An ocean underneath the ice. He had come out over a hill, and it wasn't the only one. There were a number of other small mounds of dirt or rock spread throughout, connected by frozen ice. A series of islands in a frozen sea. Finally, poor bastard. Otter didn't have much more chance to look before turning to see those present. Alan was the speaker, but he wasn't alone. Hogni, Haydeen, Alfred, Dvalin, Borling, Greer. All the executives of the Freya Familia had seemingly pushed here when they descended a week ago after hearing of his great feat, although they had clearly paid for it. None of them looked to be in great condition. For one, all 7 of them looked half frozen. Their hair was covered in frost crystals, and their lips blue. The armor of the Gulliver brothers had slick ice frozen on it. They also had the sign of combat on them. Dents in their armor, rents in clothes, chips in weapons. Alfred and Greer had wounds that were merely wrapped up. So, no potions. They also looked hungry, probably subsisting on half rations as they waited for him. Yet, not a one of them didn't retain the energy and defiance in their eyes as they gazed at Otter. You all reached here, Otter remarked, frowning. Why? And why wait for me? Isn't it clear? Alfred demanded, stance aggressive. The shadows must speak. The light can shine, but the whispers of the dark shall never be silenced, Hogni quietly muttered. It is clear, isn't it, Captain? Haydeen asked more properly, although his mouth twisted on the last word. Did you think we came to the dungeon without plans? Just rabidly coming here to fight like beasts? No, we came to show you something. You might have reached level 8, you might have beaten Bela when we thought it impossible, but we can reach here too. Bah, I came to show the bastard nothing. I came to pass him a message. Alan spat, stepping forth until he was standing right before Otter. Head tilted to glare into the Boaz eyes, totally unbothered by the difference in height. I'm coming for you. It doesn't matter as level 7 or level 8. I am Orario's fastest. I shall become the strongest. The second you stop remembering that, I'll turn you into a meal of Excelia, you hear? Otter merely met his eyes, silent. You hear that, Otter? Alan repeated, teeth gritted. No matter how deep you go. No matter what level you achieve. I'm not going to stop, and one day you'll realize I got ahead of you. Otter, I shall become the mightiest. Otter just met his eyes, finally growling out all that needed to be said. Good. Faye. Alan let out, moving and walking past Otter. Have a good time in the cold. Meathead. Fucking hate the cold. The others followed the vice-captain of the Familia. They said a few words, yet Alan seemingly spoke plenty. Even if they would never allow Alan to speak for them, sometimes even this Familia knew little more needed to be said. Otter watched them go, and only once no one could see did he feel a small smile form on his face. He then turned, looking out across the glacier territory with buoyed purpose. Message received. He jumped and started running. In actuality, Otter avoided the monsters he saw. He instead moved elsewhere, his eyes scanning for something else. arguably the only thing that truly mattered right now. He finally spotted what he sought. On one of the islands. A tree. A jump allowed him to cross the distance, landing on the ice hard enough his feet chattered it to provide him with footing. Only then did he step out, looking at the lonely little tree that survived here despite the surroundings. Primarily, the blue fruits that hung from the branches. He had known about these. The glacier fruits. The first bit of edible food the dungeon provided since the 36th floor, for a given tolerance of what counted as edible. A treacherous food source. So ice-cold it was arguably more lethal than it was edible. It would kill level 5 stubborn enough to take more than a bite, and could arguably do the same to level 6 if they ate the whole fruit. Not even level 7s were immune. They could survive, but would still need hours of heat and recovery time to warm up. Not even Zard had been able to freely eat them. Maxim, much more fragile an adventurer, hadn't been able to either. Only she had. Sometimes, Otter had pondered the wisdom of taking the risk previously, hoping he was at least as resistant as Zold, that these could sustain him. He had been warned off by similar sentiments as what stopped him at the stairs. He had no choice now, however. The Freya familiar was not Zeus or Hera. They didn't have the centuries of cultivating and building familiars specialized to reach the glacier territory with wagons of food. No one would resupply him down here. Either he was able to eat and sustain himself on these, or he was doomed once again to being stopped by pure logistics. He hadn't even brought many rations this time out of acknowledgement of that. With how fast he could descend now, he might be able to bring a week's worth of food. If he could not do this though, he would not be able to get past the glacier territory. This was what would decide if he continued on as an adventurer, or he had reached his limit yet again. His hand reached for the fruit. Clasping it in hand, he pulled it off and held it before his face. Even just holding it like this, it created a chill that stood out even in this landscape of ice. Otter took a bite. Eating ice would be many times easier. This fruit was not just cold. It was practically ice magic contained in physical form. A bomb that released sheer cold with every bite. Each bite felt little different than taking an ice spell from a level 2 or 3 right down the throat. This could kill a first-class adventurer, no doubt. Yet, Otter kept chewing. His mouth numbed, but didn't freeze. His stomach sent a protest, but still got to work digesting the food. And it could indeed be digested. Bite after bite was consumed, but his beating heart sent warm blood that banished the cold. He ate till the fruit was gone, and then dropped the remains. Otter took a minute to breath. Then he let out another small smile. I can survive here. Blood rushing and energy coursing through him, Otter looked around at this dungeon floor before stepping forth to start conquering it. Man, you think you have an idea on how you want to portray things, and then you actually have to write it. Changed a few things as I wrote and researched for this chapter. As some people will likely guess as they read, drew quite a bit from Monster Hunter for this. Otherwise, big struggle of this chapter was trying to find how much to write. Could have skipped quite a bit, but goes a bit against the dungeon exploration angle I hope to establish since I'm not running on canon stuff. This is still the experimental phase, so don't hesitate to say you could have skipped half these fights without losing anything, because how much is interesting for you readers can be different from all the monsters I want to write fights with. Otherwise, just want to state my view on food in the dungeon here. Kind of necessary, since this chapter has monsters eating monsters. Humans cannot eat monsters. The bodies remain unless their magic stones are destroyed, and dismembered parts can remain if removed before the stone is destroyed. They are poison to mortals though. If someone tries, they suffer enema degradation, or damage to the soul. Even Zold merely converted it into energy he had to expel or use through Falna. He couldn't actually eat monsters and subsist on them. Monsters can eat each other though, and while the magic stones are the best part for them, eating the rest is preferable even if most monsters don't have that innate urge or instinct. Now, that over, here is the chapter. Hello, readers of knowledge. Also sorry, readers of knowledge. I am not sure how much I can actually give you. Not only due to familiar restrictions on our knowledge of the hidden flaws, but also simply due to belief some things belong solely to those adventurers who reach them. Still, the guild is trying to insist on at least something, and I, unfortunately, possess a good half of our familiar's collective score of brain cells. The Hero familiar would be the better choice. After all, they take the greater share in the support aspects of our joint expeditions, and they actually have a level 5 supporter as one of their executives, while the Zeus familiar is more the go here and punch hard type. Yet not even the guild or Oranos have the chops to make demands like this of that crazy goddess or captain. So, here I am. Dedithelion, known as Pholus by the gods. Half-elf. Level 7 magic swordsman. Executive of the Zeus Familiar for going on 50 years now. Here to explain something about the Glacier territory, which is arguably the sole playground of the Zeus and Hera Familiars after Osiris' final challenge to us. Basics first. The 59th floor is the start of the Glacier territory, although it's the subset of said territory we have come to refer to as the Polar Seas. The name is rather self-explanatory. I'm not here to talk geography or talk maps though. In fact, I'm not even here to write about the monsters specifically. If I had to impart any knowledge on the hidden floors, it's the unique nature. Now, smarter adventurers than me who have not reached these floors have likely noticed something. Goliath 2 weeks. Amphisbena a month. Eudeus 3 months and some change. Bela 5 months and some change. There are other indications, to the sharp of eye and wit. The quicker growth in monster strength on the early floors. The lessened growth and escalation of higher-tier threats after the 37th floor. Zeus even claims that old records, from both the early age of the gods and before during the first Tower of Babel, seem to indicate greater intensity on dives. That the deeper the exploration of the dungeon, the lesser its activities on the early floors. This actually holds up in modern times. Expeditions deep into the dungeon have been noted by the guild, if quietly, to correlate to less monster parties, irregulars, and dungeon traps happening at the same time on the early floors. What does all this mean? That the dungeon is limited. Now, that is still relative to an unimaginable degree, but it is true. While potentially partly due to Urano's efforts, the reality is that the dungeon does not have unlimited energy. Even beyond the theory that the strength of monsters it can spawn are relative to the distance from its core or heart, it appears to be limited by overall energy and attention. The energy it uses to spawn hundreds of monsters in the labyrinth territory is energy at least partially taken from hordes it could spawn in the Great Tree Labyrinth, and its ability to scale up is not perfect even with descending floors. The dungeon cannot simply spawn level 6 monsters on the 54th floor in the same way it can spawn level 3s on the 24th. Its ability to escalate monster strength is better on early floors. That's why it switches to weaker monsters after the 38th floor save point. Why the Monster Rexes grow stronger, but taking longer and longer to spawn. Even without Urano's prayers, that mortals capped the dungeon at all in ancient times is proof that the dungeon cannot release hordes of higher-level monsters without limit. It might seem obvious, but the dungeon is such a great unknown and adventurers spend years delving into a seemingly endless and undaunted dungeon that it can slip the mind. Now, why does this matter? Because the 59th floor has a shift in the dungeon's strategy, or a necessary expansion in its strategy. The 59th floor is an ecosystem. You will not see many, if any, spawning of monsters the same as you do in earlier floors. No, monsters just live there. Whether adventurers reach there or not, they live. They eat. They fight. They grow. They reproduce. Yes, I did say reproduce. This might create a sense of derisiveness in some. After all, it is well known that monsters on the surface are weaker due to the necessities of monsters reproducing. The dungeon produces the magic stones at the core of every monster, and reproduction innately involves the parents weakening their magic stones to create a child. Both parents and child are weaker for it. Now, monsters eating and killing allows them to regenerate some power lost in reproduction, but the rule is that a newly born monster from the dungeon is stronger than any born through reproduction except in the case of irregulars. Forget this seeming rule once you reach this deep. The dungeon does not create monsters by this point. It supports and empowers an ecosystem of monsters. The number of pantries increases drastically, but they are also smaller and more spread out. In addition to killing and consuming each other, monsters also feed from the pantries to grow stronger. This drastically changes monster growth and behavior. Monsters have likely had generations since they were born from the dungeon, and they behave like it. That murderous impulse imparted by the dungeon is diluted. They've learned how to survive. There are seemingly herbivorous monsters traveling from pantry to pantry. Herds of monsters that behave like it. Predatory monsters that hunt on their own. Many will also run when wounded too. You can group them into lineages or species of monsters, but in reality, lifetimes and generations of growth and evolution have allowed subspecies, mutations, individual variants, and more. With what we have come to refer to as alphas being the cumulation of this competition and growth. The apex predators of these ecosystems. Not necessarily because they were just created of a stronger species, but because this was a particular monster that hunted more successfully, fed more, evolved more. They rule over their local area, imposing a forced stability. Some are lone beasts, others lead groups of lesser members of their species. Every floor will generally have anywhere from 4 to 6 of these alphas. These are the enemies most adventurers will most take note of. The floor bosses. The true outliers of the monsters that offer that challenge and danger so many of us crave. Even the Monster Rex on the 69th floor is more an alpha than something just spawned into existence by the dungeon. Just a more consistent one. A perfectly laid out chamber that when a monster of a particular type successfully lays claim to, allows it to grow to a level beyond any other on these floors. A ritual to grow a transcendent monster. Note, however, that these are still ecosystem. The dungeon does not replace anything instantly here. If you kill an alpha, it can take anywhere from days to months for the subsequent chaos and competition among nearby monsters to fill the resulting gap to result in a new alpha. When you wipe out every monster in an area, you need wait for monsters elsewhere to migrate over. The dungeon will replace them if necessary too. It can still spawn monsters of these floors, but these monsters are merely standard. The resulting ecosystem is also less sophisticated, dynamic, and robust than one that has had generations to develop. The Zeus and Hera familiars have very much dealt with the tedious result of wiping out these ecosystems wholesale. It's an interesting thing, almost a shift, as if the dungeon has been forced to acknowledge its limits and is no longer in full control of the flaws. It's led to some wondering if this is halfway down, or if we're approaching the limit of what the dungeon has created. The dead floor has led to some further support on the latter. Either way, I can offer no more answers on that. There are some other interesting little notes though, like Day 1 in Glacier territory, the 59th floor reminded Otter of old memories of the first floor. Not for any obvious reason, to anyone else. The environment was entirely different, after all. The stark cave-like structure of the first floors, arrayed into hallways, could not be compared to the raw environment of the Glacier territory. Here, Otter was forced to traverse a landscape he could not imagine humans living in outside of the dungeon. Islands formed solid bases from which pure ice grew out of, creating pathways and floating ice platforms over a sea that extended beyond the sight of his eyes. No, it was the monsters. Or more accurately, the size of the monsters. Relative to Otter, the Glacier territory felt like stepping into a land of giants. Most everything was larger. The dungeon was not averse to throwing large monsters at adventurers. His also had yet to see anything as large as the Monster Rexes. Most tended towards relative human size, however. Here, most everything he saw was at least human-sized. It did not take long to note that anything of real worth would prove far larger. It brought to mind when Otter was 7 and faced a war shadow for the first time, or being 8 and looking up at the looming form of an orc. Naturally, size was not enough to bother him. He twisted out of the way as the monster lunged forward, its thin sharp full of teeth snapping shut right where his head had just been. He struck back at the same moment. A hand rose up to grip right onto its jaws the instant they closed, strong fingers holding it closed. Wrenching its head down, his other arm wrapped around its neck, and a quick jerk let out an audible crack as its neck was broken. The monster collapsed, but seemed to at least have the final will to try and collapse its bulk onto him. It did not work, and he instead used his grip on it to lift and swing its body. This allowed him to use it to block the ranged spit attack one of its fellows let out, the spit freezing upon impact in a way that could have immobilized a limb or a smaller adventurer. Another swing then sent its ice-covered corpse into 2 that lunged to try to flank Otter. Those ones knocked away. He let go as he moved forward himself. A hand rose to the handle of one of his blades. He moved right around another spit attack, flipped over the one that lunged for him, and slashed right at its back. Its scales were no match, and it collapsed with a cry as its spine was cut right through. Otter didn't stop at that, instead eyeing the other that had launched the ranged attack. He did stop when a force lunged at him. Caught in midair, his eyes turned towards the larger form and merely grunted, HMPH. His sword lashed out, and its face was split before its jaws could latch onto him. The larger monster of the group recoiled, crying at its ruined face. Yet, it remained alive. Its cry also forced the remainder of the smaller ones to all lunge together. They died as they threw themselves against his defense, and his blade then slashed out to deflect the spit attack of the larger one. He met its eyes. Despite face split open and blood dripping, it spat with a furious bestiality and lunged. His sword thrust went right into its mouth, and sprouted from the back of its head. He shrugged its corpse off his blade and took a moment to look at the pack that had attacked him. Otter did not recognize them. Although, that was the point. If he had desired, he could have looked up any records in the guild to prepare himself for the monsters he would find in the glacier territory. He had purposefully decided not to. Once, Otter had explored the dungeon with new eyes. While he hadn't ever purposefully avoided knowledge of the new dangers the dungeon offered with new flaws, he also hadn't sought to learn of them. A dangerous habit for newbie adventurers, but one that he had still developed. At least, till he had discovered everything the dungeon had to offer in the floors he was able to access. The new drops of the Udeus and Bela had been bright spots, but arguably for the past 15 years Otter had been confined against old foes with little surprises. This time, once again, he was exploring, and that meant learning everything with his own body and experience. So, he kneeled down and started examining the monsters he just killed. Their form wasn't totally new. He had seen similar in the dense forest ravine, which contained a number of dinosaur-like monsters. These resembled the raptors, although these ones were larger and colored white and blue to create some camouflage in this icy landscape. Pack hunters like others, but these ones are cannier, he muttered to himself, eyes shifting to the larger one, led by a far larger leader that directly ordered them. The smaller ones were still large, roughly 2 meters at the back and shoulder, and over 5 meters from mouth to tail. The leader was more 3 by 7. It also had a very notable blue crest on the head. Preliminary name, White Raptors. Pack hunters of more sophisticated tactics. Ranged spitting attack that freezes. Seemingly endemic. Smaller packs of 3 or 4, while larger packs of 6 or more have larger leaders. Weak defense. Low risk except Otter jumped to avoid the far larger form that slid down the nearby slope in a tackle, lashing out with a drawn blade to dig a line in its back as it passed where he had just been. Remarkably silent, especially considering its size, which was revealed further as it managed to rise to its feet and then to its hind legs. It was now clearly twice as tall as Otter. It was vaguely bear-like, but with rabbit ears and an odd beak. Its stomach was also covered by a blue shell compared to its thick fur elsewhere. Not the most intimidating thing, if one didn't account for sheer size. That size compounded with a roar it then sent at Otter. He rushed it, too fast for it to even react. Drawing his war hammer, he kicked at its shelled stomach, not only to get a feel for its defense there thick and strong, but also to jump him up close to its head. His hammer swung out, connecting with its beak, and a crunch rang out as its beak shattered. The monster let out a bewildered and pained cry, looking at Otter. Then it turned, swiped one of the white raptor bodies, and started fleeing. Otter stared, caught off guard for a moment. Then he frowned, and drew his small hatchet. He threw it at the fleeing monster while starting to close the distance. Preliminary name, Hare Beast. Lone monster. Thick fur, fat, and shell on stomach provide it moderate defense. Surprisingly agile, especially when sliding on stomach. Sheer brute force allows it to pose some threat to a level 6 if its attacks land, and is capable of launching large snow projectiles with magic. Of low risk despite this. Cowardly, seemingly avoiding attacking except when hungry or able to ambush. Day 2 in glacier territory that would be far from his first experience with the previously rare behavior of a monster fleeing. In fact, most monsters he found seemed to be so. Most clearly just migrating, little different from beasts on the surface besides their size and strength if provoked. There were herds of reindeer-like monsters. Preliminary name, Crowned Elk. Large horns that they'll use as weapon, but otherwise attempt avoidance. Herbivores. Otter spent half a day following one group. It allowed him to find that they were traveling between what appeared to be dungeon pantries, feeding there before moving on. He was also in place to watch as a pack of white raptors took one of the herd, consuming it. It had led him to jumping in to wipe them out, since monsters eating monsters were a sign of irregulars. It also allowed him to confirm that the crowned elks did have a magic stone that proved they were monsters, despite their behavior being so off. Yet, more time on the floor proved it to be a usual occurrence. More monsters attacking other monsters. Eating them. Plenty that seemed devoted entirely to subsisting off the pantries and whatever little vegetation the monsters were seemingly able to eat, then serving as food for predators. Penguin-like monsters that lived between the sea and the ice surface. Preliminary name, Metal Penguins. Their fur has metallic spines hidden inside, which they can pull up to point outwards as protection. Weakest monster yet found in this territory, but extremely fast swimmers and of great numbers. All of these were at minimum level 5 monsters, but it was vaguely disappointing for Otter that the floor seemed more populated by prey monsters than anything further. Especially because Otter's instincts were telling him that there was something on this floor that was capable of drawing his attention. Otter dipped his hand in the ice-cold water of the sea where the ice ended, commenting after a moment, "It's warm." Potentially an exaggeration, but true. The unfrozen water was naturally warmer than the frozen landscape, but that was still relative. It was still salt water on the very edge of freezing, and this water was at least slightly warmer than it should have been. A warm current, from that direction, he said as he stood back up. An arguably minor discovery, but one he was intending to follow. Primarily as his instincts were telling him whatever he was feeling was in that direction. The only flowing water had been around the pantries. One large enough to actually create a warmer current in the sea could house exactly what he was seeking for. A true opponent. Otter was soon moving, running across the ice bridges between the islands. Great leaps taking him from island to island when there was no such pathway. When the islands were too far apart, he simply harnessed his speed to run across the surface of the water. Dual blades lashing out to cut apart the stray monsters close and quick enough to try and attack him. Yet, he kept traveling without arriving. Eventually, it was that alongside his honed instincts as a beast person which made him come to a halt. Landing on an island, he looked around, checked the position of the nearby islands, then even looked upwards, where the dungeon ceiling was so far that even his eyes could not pick it out. All that could be seen was a white and even cloudy sky that at night seemed to fade to form stars. I got turned around. Impossible. One did not survive as a solo adventurer in the dungeon without keeping your positioning in mind. He might not have been able to travel a straight line due to the positioning of the islands, but he could not have been turned around. Also, I have not found the dungeon walls, he added, absorbing this information and how it fit into this. The dungeon got larger as one descended, but it was not consistent. The 40th to 50th floors did not widen much at all, but the 51st to 57th were wide enough that, together with the labyrinthian stricture, exploring the edges was all but pointless. Mathematically, the estimation was that the 59th floor would likely be 3 times the size of Orario, and rumors state the 59th floor included a massive jump in size. Even by the wildest possibility, though, Otter should have hit the walls after this far. Is there some bewildering effect on the walls that trick the senses so one ends up heading away from them? An area that adventurers can't leave. He could only frown, though. Otter was not a smart man, and his curiosity didn't tend to extend to such mysteries like this. He would leave this to others better equipped for such investigations. As what he was clearly sensing was further beyond, though, potentially even using this to hide from him, it was displeasing to have to turn around. It was enough for Otter to climb down to the 60th floor when he found the staircase, leaving this oddly lacking floor behind. On the 60th floor, Otter experienced what it was like to be eaten for the first time. Day 3 in the glacier territory, the cold of these floors was a challenge that every adventurer to reach this far would have to deal with. Otter decided to simply endure it. Maybe he would have done otherwise if he reached here as a level 6 or 7, but at this point he had no excuse. While he had packed a cloak that could offer some protection, he ventured forth without it. Simply his usual adventuring outfit, thick skin weathering the freezing wind. It was unpleasant, but far from more than he was willing to endure. Just another way to test himself and build resistance, no matter how he disliked the cold and the memories they brought back. It did mandate some odd circumstances, though, even for him. The fruit he was subsisting on stole plenty enough heat already. That also eventually combined with a need to sleep, at least an hour or two, after 2 full days of going without. To sleep in an Arctic landscape without freezing, when one wore only light clothing, required some strategy. He chose against digging a hole in the rock or building an igloo. Each would likely require as much time as he needed to sleep. Something rougher and more makeshift was fine with Otter. So, he slaughtered a number of nearby metal penguins, piled them up, and crawled inside to use their bodies as an impromptu shelter. He had expected some interruption after an hour or 2 of sleep, but that was all he needed. He had not expected said interruption to be the entire pile being swallowed in a single bite. Otter woke but several instants before the attack came. Airborne enemy, less noise. He felt the presence approaching fast enough that he defended over trying to dodge. Even inside the pile, he got his feet beneath him and a hand on one of his blades. Then a great maw engulfed the entire pile of bodies alongside a good chunk of the ice beneath. Otter had to raise a hand to catch on one of the rows of teeth that attempted to crunch down on its meal, feet forced to find purchase on the teeth now coming from beneath through the ice too. Even as the teeth tore through the monsters to unleash blood, Otter's body strained as he halted the closing of its mouth. Arm trembling as it held the monster's upper jaw, blood spilling as the tooth cut into his hand, he drew his sword out in a draw to slash at the roof of the mouth. Ano's came from the throat, and the attempt by the monster to close its jaws to shred him intensified. He also felt his momentum shifting even more, the monster throwing its head around even as it climbed back into the air. Otter held it regardless, and this time he thrust his blade up right into the roof of its mouth. The thrashing intensified, and Otter felt his blade hit thick bone. Grunting, he stood up as much as possible till he pressed his shoulders up against a groove between the teeth. The teeth still were close enough to dig into his back, but he ignored it. Removed his other arm to press it against hilt of his blade as well. Another thrust then slammed it through the bone it had ground against, and the threshing of the monster stilled. And then Otter felt as he started falling. Otter wasn't able to orient and get out before he felt a great impact. He was well protected inside the monster's corpse, but even still he could feel it. He also felt as it started to sink further. It appeared the monster landed on and broke through some ice. He tried to get out before what he knew was coming arrived, but here he failed too. As he got right to the mouth and opened it, a flood of ice-cold water met him head-on. Lacking any sort of firm footing, he found himself caught in it and flowing backwards down the monster's throat. Fighting through it, another wave came to meet him. This time, however, of monsters. Shark-like monsters with front limbs and huge mouths surged inside. While maybe the size of a human torso, they swarmed like piranha with a fierce hunger. Many didn't even go for Otter, instead consuming the remains of the metal penguins or latching onto the flesh of the monster's mouth and throat. Enough still charged at Otter though that he had to cut his way through them, strength pushing his blade through the water as if it was air. Cutting anything that dared to get close to him, Otter swam forward. Finally bursting out of the charnel house he'd inadvertently created. He drew the other dual sword even as he spun to survey his surroundings. He was underneath the ice covering the sea, but his sharp eyes still allowed him to see the light peeking through, as well as all that was around him in the water. He first turned towards the large monster that had tried to eat him. It was a dragon, a massive black dragon that wouldn't lose out to a Valgang dragon in size. The sort of thing he'd have gladly fought properly. Yet now it was serving as a feast for every monster nearby. Shark monsters were swarming it, even if the ones trying to get through its thick scales were struggling far more than those who went at its insides. Larger, dark shapes were also appearing in the distance. Otter started to kick upwards, but was ready as his movements caught the attention of more of the monsters. His arms lashed out, cutting them all in half as they approached. Only a few that he'd coincidentally hit the magic stone of turning to ash. The ones remaining drew the attention of others approaching, who started to eat the corpses that remained. Otter didn't have time to consider that, sensing a form approaching. He spun and stabbed a sword without even checking what it was. A black and white whale monster was impaled through the head, momentum pushing him back even as its movements ceased. Feeling even more monsters about to arrive, Otter spotted the next whale monster that approached. It was far larger than the shark monsters, but the straightforward attack made him pull back from killing it right away. He instead sheathed a blade to free a hand. Focusing, he waited till the whale monster tried to take a bite of him. A quick kick of his legs put him above its mouth, and his palm pressed against its nose. Using this, he flipped his body around to rue-line right on top of it. His hand now gripping its head, allowing him to stab his blade into its head. It started to thrash and swim faster, but that was exactly what he wanted. Using his blade, he pulled at its head to guide it upwards, swimming up at full speed till the whale monster slammed right through the ice atop the water, ending up suspended in midair, where Otter smoothly shifted off it, spinning as he fell, blade lashing out before his feet landed on ice. The monster split in half, its bottom half falling right back into the hole to sink back into the depths, even as its top half slammed into the ice. Failing to break through, it rested there as it took its last breaths before passing. And Otter finally had a moment to consider that rush of activity upon waking. That moment then passed when the shark monsters burst out of the hole, eyes locking onto him with a voracious hunger despite all the food they'd just had. Or maybe because of it, considering how they were clearly larger than the ones that he'd initially encountered. Either older ones had arrived or these monsters grew fast from food. They also had limbs now. The original ones had front limbs, but now they were more developed and he could see hints of hind legs poking out. Otter did not hold back, and brought his full power to bear killing all of the ones that had surfaced. It made it a quick affair. No doubt more yet remained in the water, but that was unpleasant to think about. He looked in distaste at the corpses and was about to kick them back into the water. A tentacle reached out of the water to slam down onto the ice. At least 5 meters long, the tentacle did not break through the ice. It did proceed to swipe and gather up the corpses on the ice to pull them into the water. Otter jumped over the tentacle, but then took a moment to consider after it disappeared. Looked at the large, dark shapes in the water. The moment passed. He dived back into the water. Preliminary name, Kraken. Massive water monster. Tentacles can reach 10 meters, but their main bodies are smaller. Teeth in a large mouth. Release ink that blinds and smells. Strongest monster yet encountered on these floors, pending discovery of another dragon. Not more than a level 6 monster, but the water makes it a proper challenge to even the strongest level 6. It turned out Otter had erred in his earlier thoughts. He had failed to consider the water. It hadn't proven an issue for him, but that was only natural. Alone level 8 traveling was an entirely different thing to an expedition toting level 4s and 5s alongside wagons of supplies. The ice and depths would offer much more dangers to them. There were dangers on land, as proven by Otter having missed a dragon, but at least here they might pale in comparison to what the frozen sea offered. Despite his past experience, Otter still used a pile of metal penguins to sleep. He was more wary this time though. Enough so that he detected the approach much earlier this time. He was on his feet in a flash, weapon drawn and looking at the approaching monsters. The 3 monsters froze, eyeing him even as he eyed them. They were bear monsters, with white fur. Each had a thicker stripe of white fur that wrapped around their necks like a manner. Small ice spikes also had formed on its neck and around its snout, and its paws were all but covered in ice that ran halfway up its legs to form formidable claws. The 2 larger ones were approaching 4 meters tall even on all fours, and thickly built. The third, however, was just 2 meters tall. A juvenile. The 2 monsters growled at Otter, and shifted position to cover the young one. They didn't approach though. It made Otter not move either. Eventually tilting his head, he climbed out of the pile of monster corpses, and started walking away even as he kept eyeing them. The monsters waited till he made a distance, but then approached as a group and started to eat the monsters. Otter hummed out. The way not all the monsters attacked and had young was rather odd to think about. Troubling. Not only because he would have liked to fight those 2 monsters either. He could find others though. So, he turned and started away to do just that. The monsters Otter found got better from the 60th floor on, not only from realizing the frontier the water provided. It was clear that there were plenty of large predators subsisting on the numerous prey species that wandered or the smaller predators like the white raptors. Plenty as aggressive to any intruder or source of food as monsters from elsewhere in the dungeon. Even if they did sometimes run or have a juvenile that required some getting used to. It still proved short of what he wanted, however. This was a great place for many to train and fight monsters. Enough so that he was soon lamenting that he didn't have access to these floors when he was level 6 or 7. He could have easily cut by years the time needed to build himself up. If this region was as accessible as the 30th floor, the difficulty jump between level 5 and 7 would not be near as great as it was. It was still no place for a level 8 to push themselves. So, he chose to push on quickly. Not his usual modus operandi in not taking any shortcuts and thoroughly using every opportunity available to him, but Otter was willing to bend this time. Years and years of being stuck on the same floors made him willing to rush. Feel excitement at being able to proper delve again. To push the limit of what he's reached and break new ground. This was an adventure, and he had been far too bereft of those for years. The 60th floor passed. Then the 61st. The 62nd. 63rd. They were not without some memorable monsters that would have been worthy foes Otter would have relished facing before he broke through to level 8. The 62nd floor had Otter stumble across a monster that might have been the strongest he had faced yet. He parried the bladed tail that was whipped at him. His arms were jarred, however, and his feet dug through the ground as he was pushed back. The tail was stopped, but the parry failed and Otter spotted the notch made in his blade. Frowning, he grabbed onto the tail itself. He then started pulling. The monster struggled, even flipping itself, but Otter's strength was unyielding. He managed to swing it in a circle till crashing it into a large ice spire. The monster quickly stood, however, and Otter switched out his weapon for his war hammer. He also started chanting even as he looked at the monster. Sterling compassion, golden plains. The monster greatly resembled a blue version of the Bloodsaurus of the dense forest ravine. Almost like a wingless dragon, but with strong hind legs supporting it and all but pointlessly short front limbs. A long, powerful tail and a vicious bite. In some ways it was like the white raptors scaled up several times, but it seemed more than that. The Bloodsaurus was basically the largest non-monster rex the dungeon offered before this, at 5 meters tall, and this one was certainly not smaller. It is my fate to serve as a brute of war. Although, comparing it to a Bloodsaurus felt dishonest even beyond that this monster was already showing capabilities more in line with a level 7. As if to show it, the monster opened its mouth and a beam shot out his mouth with a roar. Run through, carrying the divine will of the goddess. Otter merely raised the war hammer to block it, however. He felt himself be pushed back, the ground cracking underneath his feet. Ice formed not only on the weapon, but all around Otter. He was standing in the face of an attack ready to freeze anything before it in solid ice. Otter didn't care. Hildes Vini. His chant finished, golden magic flowed into the hammer. Aswing shattered the ice covering it, the ice surrounding him, and the shockwave extended to split the beam till it connected with the monster. It took several steps back, shaking its head, before looking back at Otter. He was encased in golden energy, and met its gaze. Despite the display, the beast showed no cowardice and merely roared. Its bladed tail slammed into the ground, and came up with ice sticking to it in a way as to form an even larger ice blade. It roared again. Otter nodded at its defiance, before striding forth to beat it back. Otter was less bothered by how the monster burst out of the ice in an attempted ambush as what he found when he looked at it. It looked like the previous shark monsters, just fully grown. Massive in that growth too. The torso-sized beasts were clearly but larval forms for this 4-meter-tall monster. The spike on the heads of the juveniles was gone, although the way it slammed its head into the ground and came up with an ice blade soon solved that. It looked strong. It also had limbs though, almost frog-like. Otter was not amused, even if it did prove a fight not inferior to the one the dinosaur monster had given. Otter stared at the second monster that had attacked from the sea before climbing onto land. It was the same killer whale he'd experienced before when fighting in the sea on the 60th floor. Like the shark monster though, this one on the 63rd floor seemed more developed. A horn had sprouted on its head like a unicorn, and it had grown larger. Its chest was all but bursting with new muscle. Mainly as, like the shark monster, it now had arms. Otter started chanting. He was ready to leave the 63rd floor. Day 6 in the glacier territory so, he descended another staircase to the 64th floor. He exited, and immediately could tell there was a shift in the surroundings. The cold was just as fierce. Wind still blowing to chill the blood. Yet, his beast-person senses picked up the minor differences. He circled to see what was different. He exited near a sea once again, and the frozen landscape there was the same. In the other direction there was proper land. Buried in snow, but still land. In fact, in the distance there were even trees and hills. This was less an iceberg-covered rock sprouting out of the ocean, and a proper island. The Arctic tundra of the glacier territory. Shakti came to without any call or noise drawing her from sleep. Just the same silence she had been forced to get used to. She still woke seamlessly. Years of routine and rigorous discipline making her shake off sleep in moments. She stood and started moving her morning preparations. Made herself food without a word spoken, and eating it the same way. The usual meal she made, since she had no reason to vary what she made. Afterwards she washed herself, dressed, and groomed herself. She walked through the empty apartments the Vumol line had lived in for 6 generations since coming with Ganesha to the city of adventurers 300 years ago. She only stopped at the entryway. There, she paused to look over 9 pictures she had placed in the alcove there. She moved silently and seamlessly to light the candles placed before each one, and then offered a prayer to none in particular since Ganesha was still in the mortal lands. It was just rote action by this point. They were already gone and in the cycle of reincarnation. That over, she turned and walked out of the silent family apartments. As always, the Ganesha familiar home was anything but silent. Ganesha always made sure of it, like now as he was standing on the center platform of the meeting hall. Flexing in different poses, he was also calling out with each one, fight. Burn bright. The day is young. Your lives are still beginning. Use it to the fullest. Play a song. Confess a love. Lie in the sun. Have a good cry. Represent all of Orario. For you are Ganesha. A few members moving rapidly around the area called out with him, but most merely continued on. As bombastic as he was, even Ganesha was often mere background scenery for the familiar since this was just him. Big sis, Ilta called as soon as she saw Shakti arrive. Aha, the spear of Ganesha has arrived. Now we just need to set our hearts alight. Quiet, Ilta said at that, unamused. You're annoying. I am Ganesha. How did the rest of yesterday go? Shakti immediately asked, ready for business. The familiar had decided, at Ganesha's urging, that Shakti should take half of yesterday to rest and relax for the expedition since she was the center point of their goal. She understood the point, but if anything it had only made her feel more apathetic on this whole affair. Ganesha playing music out her window hadn't changed that either. Have the potions been procured? Yes, Ilta said in a voice that made clear she didn't much care for the topic. Shakti knew she at least felt responsible enough to not blow it off entirely. Ilta was not much of what one often wanted in a vice captain, but Shakti would not have hesitated to remove her if she didn't meet some standard. Loki familiar finally stopped haggling against us with Dian's sect, but no doubt Bravo is going to try to frame it as some favor later. An issue if we need to keep buying from them, Shakti noted. Loki familiar are far more consistent customers, and Dian's sect won't forget it. Managed to work that out too, big sis. Well, someone else did, but what does it matter? Ilta claimed, shrugging. We shifted a few things around. Tamana gave up making the lesser antidotes like she usually does, and we switched our usual order from the Dien sect. Potions and mind potions to high versions. Former means we'll have to buy basic antidotes and latter is the same alongside a bit more expensive, but it should keep us well stocked with super antidotes as well as make Dien sect want to keep us happy. And what about basic potions? Shakti asked, eyes serious. We still have plenty of level 1 and 2s that you shouldn't forget. We managed to make some contracts with some lesser familiars, Ilta explained once again. Damn, Tamana. Who did we contract again for the basics? One of the women nearby looked away from her conversation, answering shortly. Mayak and Orsrine. I've told you like half a dozen times. They are so small time, it hardly matters, right? Ilta said even as she turned back to Shakti. They'll give us the basic stuff as we use harder sources for the hard stuff. Shakti told her immediately. The basics matter. Make sure to check up on them in the future. Small familiars tend to be vulnerable. Didn't Mayaka's familiar used to be big though? Remember them from the feud. Old news, but they have the reputation for trust, Ilta pointed out. True. Mayak is an upstanding god, Shakti conceded, far too used to other gods to not acknowledge that. I think the Orsrine familiar is considered off limits in Daedalus streets. Don't know why, but it ensures a robbery won't put them in dire straits. Still, I want you to assure the product since you did this. Sure, big sis. Sure. Shakti wasn't sure she could trust Ilta to do that, especially with both of them heading into the dungeon, but that would be an issue to check on later. Okay, and what about the gear for the dragon's cauldron? Hey, I'll shot your dash. The two moved to walk out of the room. Ganesha had kept up the routine while they were there, but paused once they moved and cut them off by calling. Shakti. We should update your blessing, and I am Ganesha. She paused at that reminder, and conceded that point. She did a bit more work to ensure the preparations were in their final stages, but then met up with Ganesha. Just minutes later, she was adjusting her clothes after the update while commenting, Don't expect much of a difference. It's been a good month, but our last expedition was cancelled. It matters not. This is a record of your life as a member of my familia. It is precious on its own, Ganesha said, all but shoving the paper in her face despite speaking softer now. She sighed, but was used to it and merely took it. Shakti Vama level 5 basic abilities. Strength, D599 endurance, D599 dexterity, B746 equals B749 agility, B749 magic, D590 equals D592 developmental abilities, Tamer, F abnormal resistance, E spearman, G healing power, H magic Darpana Avamata skills Ganapati blood Enurakti Varad. Shakti immediately tossed the sheet into the fire when she saw the final bit, saying sternly while looking at her god, You shouldn't have put that down. Do you think someone would see it here? Ganesha said, crossing his arms and laughing boldly. It's about the principle, she replied, although she soon lost any heat. You know better, my lord. Ganesha said, arms still crossed. A hint of dissatisfaction in it. Shakti ignored it, just shaking her head and commenting. So, I just need to focus on magic and high-class Excelia. Former is simple enough so long as I am in the dungeon. The latter. She had far from sought any. Now, some was unavoidable. She'd never had issues in confronting whatever challenges came before her, and the familiar delved deeply enough that she'd often been forced to stem the tide for everyone's sake. She could not remember the last time she actually sought to level up, however. "You can do it, Shakti. I know you can," Ganesha said, voice settled in a way that made her look at him. "It is elsewhere that I worry you. This is fine," Shakti said, looking away and ignoring that she cut him off. She also stood and dusted off her clothes. "I shall manage, if the familiar needs me to." She didn't give Ganesha much of a chance to respond further, walking out the door. Ganesha stayed there for a moment, arms crossed. Eventually, he gave a deep sigh to release the worry and tension. He then straightened again, mouth curved in a smile. He also pulled out a violin as he stood, already playing as he left the door. "I am Ganesha, and I shall prepare the celebratory departure." "So, it looks like we are ready," Shakti said as she looked over the 2 lines arrayed before her. The rest of the familiar was arrayed in other lines along the courtyard, but this was the group about to head in. "No one has any concerns or issues to raise." "We are ready, Captain," Ilta said, saluting and actually using her title again. Varna Freya and the rest of the Freya familia came back 3 days ago, and the guild announced they'd reached the 59th floor. "Ah, it irritates me. That bunch." Shakti was unimpressed by her vice-captain's frustrated display, or her words, especially when many others set for the expedition seemed to share the same sentiment, if more controlled about it. "You are irritated they reached the glacier territory first?" she asked, face stoic. "Do not get ahead of yourselves. Loki familia can be irritated their rivals got excited and risked themselves out of pride. We are not rivals to either of them. We are the shields of Orario." "Yes, Captain." They all shouted that, but Ilta couldn't help herself as she said, "Doesn't mean we can't also be the spear of Orario too." "Sometimes a person must decide what they are," Shakti merely warned. Honestly, she was irritated. This expedition that had been forced on her felt half pointless. Shakti's job was to save lives. Both the lives of the civilians on the surface, but also those of her familiar members from unnecessary pride and foolishness. She had little patience for grandstanding or unnecessary displays. Third strongest familiar in Orario or not, to compete was never her goal, only to do what was necessary. It was why she had reluctantly agreed to this expedition. She recognized their point. She did not care about Otter reaching level 8. If her own familiar believed, however, the building chaos that was a rush of adventurers trying to level up and push further due to that was not something they could handle as they were, she could not entirely disagree. If Shakti reaching level 6 and Ganesha familiar making a strong statement in their expedition was what might reassert their authority as a deterrence and calm the chaos even a slight bit, she would do so. She would do as she had to, even if she had little to no interest in this. What was level 6 but a number? She could not deny either, at least to herself, that the expedition before her still made her heart beat wildly too. Not in fear for herself. Shakti could handle herself. That wasn't the same for the others around her, however, and she had already seen how this was likely to end. This was necessary. Necessary. Repeating that to herself and hiding any such feelings from her face, she spoke coolly. "Still, to the 59th floor we shall go." To risk life and limb of her comrades for a tick in the number of the guild's register. She had to wonder if any before her shared any such sentiment as they snapped to and yelled in unison, "Yes, Captain Shakti." She nodded at them, then looked them over again. 8 level 5s, including herself and Ilta, and 8 level 4s. A mere 16 felt like it could hardly count as an expedition, but this was the best setup they could have. Anyone less would slow them down more than the numbers helped. The Dragon's Cauldron was too dangerous for those weaker, and they couldn't spare the level 4s or 5s to defend a camp on the 50th floor. "Then pick up your bags and prepare to go," she ordered. They all nodded. The level 4s all picked up large packs, acting as the dedicated supporters even if they were also armed and armored for the inevitable conflict. Even the level 5s were picking up smaller ones. Only Shakti and Ilta were spared from such duties, the sole 2 dedicated vanguard and combatants allowed with such a small group. They had to survive on what they could carry, no wagons this time, so they were carrying as much as possible. As they did so, Shakti turned to the surrounding familia and announced, "We leave Orario in your hands. Most are too distracted to make trouble, and the Loki familia shall be available for a time as they are preparing a larger expedition to the glacier territory, but you must still do your part. Chaos and disorder can create trouble as much as ill will." They saluted together. "Don't worry. We'll survive without you, Captain," a man said as he approached, winking.
Orario is a stubborn one, I've found. Except when it is weak and vulnerable, Shakti said, even as she relaxed slightly at the man's approach. Guess that's true. Even the strongest and most stubborn among us still need support at times, even if we try to pretend otherwise, he declared, laughing in good nature. Shakti did not laugh, but she relaxed as she shot him a nod and told him, I'm leaving things in your hands, Ando. I promise that I'll devote my being to not fumbling it, he replied, nodding back. Ando was one of the familiar's level 5. Although few would be impressed at the sight of him. He didn't give the impression of it. Despite being but 3 years older than Shakti's own 38 years, the life-rejuvenating aspects of the fauna certainly hadn't served him as well. He looked every year, with some extra. His brown hair was faded and already turning gray, and the wrinkles of his face spoke of a hard life. Yet, he still retained a calming smile of a reliable figure. Ando was not someone who some would consider a true member of the familiar. Once a member of the school district, he leveled up to 2 there before traveling the world. In his decades, he had served an array of familiar. A wandering knight, he had often claimed himself. Combating monsters where there were few adventurers. He had only infrequently dropped by Orario for some training in the dungeon, and each level had been dearly earned. Shakti had valued him highly though, as Ganesha did. Even if he typically had only stayed for a year or so every 4, she had welcomed him. To Orario, he was an underwhelming adventurer in strength and quality. Yet, he had a strong heart. Shakti was fond of him. When he had clearly plateaued like so many others at level 4, she had started ensuring he accompanied her into the dungeon. 3 months of that had allowed him to level up to 5 3 years ago. He still traveled, but he was a valued comrade. In Orario, Ando was among the least impressive of level 5s. Yet outside, he had years of traveling and helping others. It had made him an easy choice for her to leave in charge during the expedition, despite the other 2 level 5s staying being stronger. Only Shakti and Ilta likely had the person reputations anyway to serve as deterrents. Anyone remaining would only have the reputation of the entire familiar, so best make it a person who had experience in talking others down and earning trust. Orario isn't going to blow up as soon as you leave anyways, a new voice said, a man coming and wrapping an arm around Ando's shoulder. This one with a scar over his left eye. He was also older, but wore it better than Ando. His grin was wider too. We'll handle it, so don't worry, Shakti. Please do your best, Hazhana, she answered back, nodding stoically. Hazhana she was less fond of. Not only because he had a certain reputation and tried to use the moves that earned him said reputation on her either. He was still a trusted member of the familiar though. Looked up to by the second strong members of the familiar. Rather expected though. Hazhana was one that had also plateaued at level 4, but Shakti had little desire to go out of her way to try and change it. Not that he wanted to much either. Hazhana was seemingly satisfied in standing over most adventurers as a reliable second-class adventurer than stepping in as among the least of the first class. He rarely served among the expeditions, preferring to lead smaller groups of their weaker members. Still, he would be invaluable in helping Ando coordinate the wider familiar with the other leaders she was leaving behind. I trust you all, she finally said, giving a deeper bow of her head to make it clear. After a few more words, she turned to see the expedition group was ready. Packs ready. Ilta's attire meaning she didn't have much to check. Shakti did a last-minute check of her own. She finally could only take a deep breath to try and delay it further. She then announced, "Open the gates. We are set to leave." "What about Lord Ganesha?" one member asked, noting the lack of their god. "I am sure he shall meet us on the way," she answered. Ganesha was many things, but he rarely dropped the ball when it came to being there for his familiar or the people. She also proved right. "Ha ha, there they are," Lord Ganesha declared loudly, violin still playing. "My darling children, I am going to play them a song encouraging them to fight with all their hearts, but also to serve as a command that they must return. Everyone join in. Ha ha, this guy. It is Lord Ganesha. His loud. Very loud, but it is Ganesha. Yeah, hard to be worried too when he gets like this." The reason for Lord Ganesha to have set out early was also clear. His music had drawn in numerous people on the road leading to Babel, listening to the music of the gods. It had all but created an audience when the expedition started down that road. The group suddenly found themselves the center of attention, receiving wished of luck and celebratory send-offs. It made some of them shuffle in embarrassment, but Shakti could only sigh and continue forward with stoic expression on. In the midst of all this,
Ganesha let out. Shakti. She looked. I'll be waiting for you. You can do it, he declared, sending her a thumbs up. I'll always be waiting. She paused, but finally gave him a bow of her head as she said, By your divine will. We shall return, and I shall succeed here. Level 6. Although, she didn't need to be told that such wasn't quite what her god meant. Less fun fact of the chapter: Shakti, not the type to get hyped up by the thought of leveling up. The elite Ganesha expedition group moved quickly through the upper floors, restricted only by keeping a pace that wouldn't sap their stamina early. Although, Shakti did find reason to stop while sending the others ahead. Already going on an expedition? Tsubaki asked as she met her outside their little camp of tents. The smith appeared bemused by the unexpected arrival. I didn't expect you of all people to jump into the dungeon so quickly, Shakti, even with the hubbub. I could say the same to you, Shakti noted, pointedly looking at her fellow level 5 captain. It was hard to imagine the reason behind Tsubaki having come into the dungeon so eagerly, just looking at her. Besides being only this deep, Tsubaki's attire showed a lack of seriousness. The half-dwarf captain of the Hephaestus familiar hadn't even bothered wearing the robe-like top, only covering her top half by binding her breasts. It revealed plenty, when one took into account Tsubaki's voluptuousness. Well, it no doubt motivated the low-level members of the Hephaestus familiar that were present. Shakti was not unaware of the value of being both beautiful and a first-class adventurer for those in their position. Not that such was likely Tsubaki's reasoning here. It instead illustrated how lacking intention Tsubaki was in the current activity. Shakti still eyed the other aspects that caught her experienced eye. Despite looking as young as Shakti herself, Tsubaki wore signs of lacking sleep. A choice for a level 5 here with a party this size. The sheen on her tan skin wasn't matched by heavy breathing, so not from combat. Hints of ash and metal slag were easy enough to smell to a level 5 senses. She came into the dungeon to smith far beyond the demands of what these floors demand. There was clearly something missing. What can I say? Tsubaki said, breaking Shakti from her internal musings by making a fist as her soul eye developed a twitch of irritation. I was called out. Shakti raised an eyebrow, looked around, and then commented simply, the 12th floor. Hey, I'm here for them right now, Tsubaki retorted, flicking a rock as if to illustrate. The rock connected with bad bat across the chamber, all but making it explode despite the plainness of the act. The adventurers it had stunned with its shriek now able to recover. I hate those things. Shakti merely nodded, but still asked, still, camping here. The higher floors were still an area where one could travel to and from the surface in a day. That didn't even change till the late middle floors. It was roughly the 20th floor that required sleeping inside the dungeon, and it was more convenient to sleep on the 18th floor there. Sleeping on these floors was more training for overnight expeditions, when a familiar is in that awkward stage of starting on the middle floors yet not able to reliably reach Rivera. My time will come. This is just me earning the time for the expeditions folk is preparing, and trying to use it as best I can, Tsubaki explained bluntly. And if I'm spending time here, I'm making sure they are using every moment of it too. It made Shakti nod. Deep dive expeditions for a non-exploration familiar were quite an ask, but needed for a veteran level 5. Even before Zeus and Hera fell, it was more efficient to attach oneself to a suitably exploration familiar. Such thoughts naturally made Shakti ask firmly, Do you want to join us? Our goal is the 59th floor, and I would welcome your aid. While food was as liable to force them to retreat as broken equipment, Shakti would still consider a second veteran level 5 as a boon. You know, if you had asked me before, I might have agreed, Tsubaki confessed, lips twisted with regret. But I'm committed now. Not stepping out after I made a speech to my familiar. Make sure to contact me next time, however, as I'm likely to need to accompany someone. Shakti made sure not to frown. Her spontaneous attempt at reinforcing her party for greater safety failed. Tsubaki quickly she turned it back on Shakti with a smirk, continuing, And don't think I missed that you didn't answer me earlier. Jumping into the dungeon yourself. No? I might have been faster, but you're leading a deep dive. Shakti didn't allow her thoughts to show, instead pointing out stoically, We did have that expedition planned for 3 weeks ago, so we had a great deal in storage. We were fortunate to avoid a frenzy arising. I am guessing that the guys I left behind are dealing with a load and a half right about now, Tsubaki commented with a chuckle. You would be right. Tsubaki continued thinking though, finally musing aloud. Just 3 weeks, eh? Since you passed on the Udeus to me, feels longer. That, Shakti said, hesitating before sighing. Yes it does. So much different in under a month. She couldn't have imagined that she'd be leading an expedition to the 59th floor back then. There were a whole array of priorities that would have discounted this as a possibility. No one had overly protested then either that she had passed off the quest to kill the Udeus. There wasn't a need to rush. And now she was here. Shakti couldn't say she was entirely pleased. She had no ill will towards Otter and even felt pleased that Orario had a stronger mightiest, but the disturbance to the status quo wasn't something she could look highly upon. For adventurers, the fruits of ambition were earned by climbing over the bodies of those lacking the luck or talent to grab it themselves. She feared who she would be forced to step over this time. Only failures to prevent it, no matter how desperately she wished, had worn away her belief that this time would be any different. If only the Great Feud was the last time she'd ever have to. I must go. I shouldn't allow them to go too far ahead of me, Shakti said as she turned, firming herself to force herself to keep moving. She started away from her fellow. I shall leave you to your own familiar activities, Sabaki. Yeah, thanks, Sabaki said, although she clearly trailed off. She called out again though before Shakti could round a corner. Hey, Shakti. She only reluctantly stopped and looked back. I really don't like the look of you right now, but can't stop you. So, Sabaki remarked aloud, looking Shakti over with a doubting gaze. She wiped it away as she continued with a bright smile. Good luck, and be safe. I rather figure you're being pushed to try to level up, so let's have a drink when you get back. Think both of us could use a chance to vent. It went against her current mood, but she finally nodded and remarked while turning to leave. Lord Ganesha will owe me enough that I'll bring some wine from his good stash. I'm a mead gal, but I won't turn that down. After that quick aside with her fellow captain that was one of the few remaining of Shakti's age group, the group moved without delay. They naturally made excellent time. Without the usual wagons of more serious expeditions setting the pace, they were limited only by how far they were willing to push. To forego breaks or not, made it far closer to a simpler resource-finding group dive than the usual deep dive. Shakti wasn't sure yet if restricting themselves to these numbers was wise, but it did have benefits. The floors flowed by. Entire regions of the dungeon. With their group, little could directly hinder them. The large tree labyrinth was sped through, only hindered by its size and winding terrain. The water city was scaled even quicker, their group jumping down floor by floor over needing to utilize the passageways of the usual adventurers there. The 28th floor safe spot was ignored, and they entered the dense forest ravine. Here at least they had to at least partially worry about the monsters, but Shakti and Ilta served plenty well at eliminating them fast enough that their speed slowed more from caution than necessity. It was finally on the 36th floor that they stopped for a night, utilizing the fruits of this area to subsist on and leave their supplies untouched. The next day proved harder. The floors to the 50th were more troublesome by far than all the ones before. Even moving fast and ignoring any monsters that didn't require fighting, they could not proceed without needing to go through entire hordes. The sheer numbers of these floors made total avoidance impossible. So, Shakti had some of the others present join her and Ilta in clearing the way. A chance to stretch their muscles and warm up. These were typically the floors that first and second-tier adventurer tiers topped out at in smaller and more makeshift expeditions anyways, so everyone was used to these enemies. In the volcano wilderness floors, that stopped being the case. Entire armies of monsters started to block the way. More than willing to spend countless of their lives if it allowed them to drag even one adventurer down to tear them apart. The floors that often even full expeditions usually found themselves outnumbered in. There was a reason only 3 familiars of Orario had currently broken through these floors. The cost in equipment of fighting so many hordes of tough monsters. The risk of encirclement. The attrition that could easily leave scores of level 3s and 4s wounded and exhausted. Everything about these floors were a grind. To reach the 50th floor safe point was what made an exploration familiar currently receive the S-rank designation. Here they needed total focus and proper coordination. Lacking the usual numbers of level 3 that helped form lines to hold them back, Shakti knew they couldn't do their usual strategies. By the same token, however, they didn't have to either. They didn't have the wagons that usually necessitated proper defensive lines. Form 3 lines, rush assault. She ordered as they ran towards a group of monsters that were strategically positioned to force combat for anyone to advance. She didn't need to say any more to get them moving. Vetter and Ligon slipped their packs off, handing them to Dench, and moved to form the front line with Shakti and Ilta. Veta already chanting. The second line of 6 formed, Graint on one flank and Ladako on the other to protect the burdened level 4s in the center. The remaining 6 formed the third line, but this time Rihanna and Anais, the final 2 level 5s, were in the center. Shakti had no more time to consider anything but the battle as they crashed right into the mass of enemies. Her own spear swung out with all her strength, removing the heads of 3 Fomois and releasing a shockwave that stumbled the ones behind them. Her shoulder impacted the corpse in front, throwing it back and allowing her to push through. Her spear thrust right into the neck of the one behind, and used it as leverage to jump. Her foot connected with the head of another as she vaulted into the air, her body twisted and her spear lashing out at full speed. The monsters in reach fell as their heads and shoulders were sliced and pierced, and she landed inside a circle of dead monsters. She continued to dash forward, continuing to cut through every enemy in her way. She wasn't alone. Ilta plowed through the enemies before her, more than willing to match the Fomois and Flame Rock's strength to strength. The crumbled and shattered bodies also showed it worked well enough for her. Ligand and Veta completed the tip of the spear. Ligand's heavy armor and massively oversized axe left him even more a blunt force than Ilta, and these monsters couldn't stand up before him. Veta's enhancement spell had also finished, lengthening his spear head by several feet with a blade of wind so every swing of his spear cut a wide circle. The second line pushed into the hole behind them. Graint's heavy shield bashing back the enemies that came in once Veta passed to get close to the wider second line, and Ladako's spear did the same on the other side while reaping the life of any monster left unfinished by Ligand's bull rush. The third line found few enemies, instead looking to provide ranged support. Rihanna's bow supporting while their 2 mags looked to assess if they would need to launch magic. The fourth working as protection. The formation allowed them to punch through the enemy, moving forward faster than the monsters could close in behind them. A race to see if they would break through the enemy rear before the monsters caught up to their own. It was far from unexpected when 2/3 of the way through the sheer mass of monsters succeeded in slowing them down enough for the warning to come from behind. "Captain." Anais, she called without hesitation. The sole real level 5 mage among the Ganesha familia was on top of it, clearly having spotted it and already working on the chant. The others in the rear line moved to protect her too. Breath of Winter's might confine. In icy bounds, they shall serve their time. Frigid petrification. The closing in wave of monsters found themselves faced with a burst of ice reaching out to them. They could only brace or desperately swing at the magic. The magic swallowed them regardless. The flash of magic died down after but several seconds, revealing Anai's work. The monsters roared in anger and frustration. Well, some of them. Some had their mouths sealed. Those that didn't still found their movements sealed by the ice that had crept up their bodies to form ice that bound them as firmly as any cage and chain. The level 4 monsters shrieked and strained against their bindings, but the ice held and the mass of bound monsters turned into an obstacle for the ones coming up from behind. Shakti did not even look back, only striking more fiercely the monsters before them as she yelled out, "Do not relent. Forward." The successful magic attack covering their rear and the sight of Shakti striding forward re-energized the other members, and the enemy failed to hold them before they broke through. Their party continued moving forward, leaving the furious monsters futilely pursuing. The encounter repeated no small number of times. Sometimes they managed to push through without needing a spell, and occasionally they had harder fights. As was often the case with the dungeon, the way everything piled on at once did not feel coincidental. Shakti's senses detected it, and she called out, "Upper left." Seeing the attack coming up on them, Shakti used a spin of her spear to knock the Fomois before her back. She then used the space to dart forward, slipping between several of the clumsy flame rocks. She started spinning her spear again, prepared to deflect the assault of rocks that were coming at them. Only her high dexterity allowed her the sharpness of vision to notice their glow, dropping her spear and ducking before them. They passed so close she felt the air as they skimmed her face. She also felt the intense heat. Molta strike incoming. Everyone knew what that meant, but not everyone was fast enough with the late warning. Ilta and Veta dodged, but Ligand moved to take the broiling rocks projectiles before they hit the second line. Clanging of them on his armor rang out and he was thrown down. His armor was dented, but held. Ilta had to move in, kicking away the monsters that tried to pile on him though. Despite the attempt to, a sparse several got through. Disk, Tamana, and Uda all took stray shots, falling and grasping at the burned impact wounds. Dench dodged. Close ranks, Shakti said as she jumped back, turning towards the monsters that had attacked. A Molta, the larger and stronger version of a flame rock. Thankfully also rarer, usually operating around lava streams or the adamantite deposits on these floors. Their route from stair to stair should have avoided any, but that was the dungeon. Something going wrong was part the course for why not even the best-equipped expedition might be forced to turn back from their goal. In this case, while one of the stronger monsters on these floors, the Molta was more threatening for the way they often damaged melee weapons used on them. Gah! Graint's deep voice called out. Ducking a flame rock and destroying two monsters in a single transition, Shakti glanced and saw he had been thrown back by an irregular fomwa. Graint called even as he held up the heavily dented shield. The two level 4s armored the same as him were thrown back by a second blow of the irregular, and were far slower to get up. Graint's quick recovery allowed him to cover them when the goat monster tried to slam a club down on them, even if he was forced to a knee. Fucking strong one. And when the man with the heaviest defense of their level 5s said that, he clearly meant it. Block it, Shakti commanded simply, now working with the front lines to hold back the new push of the monsters. Don't let our right flank collapse. Hold till we recover. Anise. Krem. Block off the rear and left. Got it, Graint said, standing and now merely holding onto his shield with both hands as he endured blow after blow. Even when the shield started to look more like bent metal than anything. He managed to endure though till his two comrades moved to either side of him, the three holding and reinforcing each other. Graint's skill buttress barricade. When part of a shield wall, it increased not only his only defense but also those in said shield wall. Not of much use as an individual adventurer, but great in units. He led the subunit of the Ganesha Familia of heavily armored shield bearers. The one that took the shields of Orario claim of the Familia more literally, and so chose the blunt name of the shields. The two with him had been brought because 3 was the smallest number the skill could activate with. He would hold that flank till his armor broke. He would not manage to beat back the irregular though. Ligand, help Graint, she ordered. She then looked at the rest of the grouping. The injured had already downed potions to try and recover, but they needed time. Ladako and Rihanna were managing to drive enemies back long enough for their 2 mags to chant. Frigid petrification. Eshin growth. Anise this time used her spell to freeze enemies on the left flank, once again obstructing the ones coming from behind. Krem blocked the rear in turn. Her spell led to a wood erupting from the ground in spikes. Flam rocks chipped and foamwa roared as their legs, groins, and stomachs were pierced. Few fell outright, however, with how spread out the spell was. Yet, that same nature ensured they formed a proper barrier that the monsters struggled to get past. Akri went out as one of their level 4s moved amidst the wooden spikes, punching a foamwa in the face with an earthen gauntlet that knocked it back. A longsword in one hand also moved to start warding the mod. Udar also reinforced, still wounded from the Molta attack but using his other to wield his whip. His taming DA heightening the reluctance of any of the wounded monsters to press forward. Once again, the stabilization of the situation was complicated as purple needles shot down at their group and then screeches came. Paluda. And falcon bats. Ladako quietly murmured as she jumped, cutting down one of the large bat monsters as it swooped down to try and snatch up Krem. Paluda. Wingless dragons that roamed anywhere from the 37th floor to the 49th, but rare. Poisonous, and unleashed spines that delivered the poison. This one was crawling on the rocky roof of the massive chamber, its purple, lizard-like form far enough it would be hard to anyone but the most ranged attacks to strike back. Falcon bats. Another rare monster, and usually loners. They attacked in the darkest areas of these floors, trying to snatch and carry off individual adventurers from groups or formation. Usually then dropped them in the midst of enemy hordes. The screeches indicated what Shakti should have expected. The Molta finally arrived before the front line too, its 3-meter form looming over them and its mere presence heating the air. Even better. Shakti moved forward, spear behind her back as she instead punched the Molta hard enough it was sent stumbling back. She merely shook out her now-burned hand, uncaring of the pain. She then ordered calmly, despite the new challenges, everyone, engage. Krem, Rihanna, we need those falcon bats and Paluda brought down. Anise, keep on covering our flanks. I'll handle this one, then we advance again. Tamana. She heard Tamana's chant end. Duality shelter. Blue and red lights surrounded Shakti in a protective embrace. She needed nothing else before darting forward. The Molta swung its jagged, sword-like arm at her, but she easily dodged and jumped. A kick landed on its head, and was followed by a barrage of punches. She swung her body to avoid its burning hand grasping her, using it to knee the monster. Each blow chipped more off its body, but the refusal to use her spear at risk of damaging it was clearly going to make bringing it down no easy task. Hearing the fighting behind her and the continued attempts of surrounding monsters to close in on them, Shakti sighed and started chanting. The mirror turns. Reflections abound. The Malta was shattered beneath her fists. The Fomoir irregular lost its head. The Paluda's poison failed and it fell from the ceiling. The falcon bats were caught and brought down. The Ganesha familiar pushed through. So, able to prioritize traveling over pure annihilation of the monsters in their way like most expeditions, the 44th floor soon became the 49th. This is the 49th floor. The Moitora. Or what they believed was the 49th floor. It certainly was different, however. They had been here enough times. The usually flat ground had been transformed. A great canyon, the most prominent new landmark, but also no small number of craters, rents in the ground, and boulders formed when torn and tossed from the ground. Is this from the battle between Baylor and the king? Ilta asked, moving to touch one of the new boulders in a tone too overwhelmed to be awed. It must be. What else could have caused this? But shouldn't the dungeon have repaired it by now? Can the dungeon even be damaged beyond repair? Shakti just let the talks happen, instead commenting, "There's something else." That made everyone look at her before trying to find what she meant. Graint was the one to notice, pointing out, "There's barely any monsters." The 49th floor was always a hassle to get through. Even without Baylor, and the Ganesha familiar had never tried to finish it off themselves. For good reason, the floor often served to host a great deal of monsters. While monsters didn't spawn there when the Baylor was present, monsters instead arriving from above and below, they did between Baylor's spawnings. The wide, flat floor also created the perfect area for those numbers to be brought to bear. One almost never managed to get through it without needing to wipe out entire hordes of monster wholesale. Of all the floors, it was the 49th that Shakti feared they might be bogged down after failing to pierce through. Yet, her eyes only picked up stray monsters scattered over the massive landscape. They must have moved in from the 48th floor, she mused aloud. The floor unrepaired from the great battle that tore through it, and no monsters spawning? Either was notable, but both clearly meant something was occurring. We'll need to inform the guild when we return. At least better for us, right sis? Ilta remarked with a grin. Shakti nodded at that point, announcing, "We'll make for the 50th floor safe point to rest." The 49th floor proved the easiest to clear, counter to expectations. The 50th floor. The safe point that yet only the top 3 familiar in Orario had reached since the disastrous losses against the one-eyed black dragon. Its rivers and grey trees signaled some small protection for them to set up camp. "We'll take a full day here, both to rest and do our preparation," Shakti announced sternly after the camp was set up. Her eyes swept the group as she gave orders. "Ilta, you stay here and watch the passage to the 51st floor. I'll lead the tamers back to the 49th floor." The groupings was quickly made as everyone started on their work. Eventually, despite her own tendency to handle as much as reasonable on expeditions, Shakti found herself moving to take a break. Walking the stairs down to the 50th floor, she ran the distance through the grey trees and hilly terrain towards where they set up camp. She soon landed and surveyed the camp that had been set up. It wasn't much, compared to their usual. They had discarded bringing tents to save space, so there were just minimal bedrolls. Yet, trees had been cut for seating and everything. Organized. A pot was also already cooking something that was releasing an enticing aroma. They usually relied on hardtack and other rations, but not even Shakti desired to cut out luxury foods for spots like this when they had the time and safety. Morale was important, and Shakti despised hardtack. Mind turning to food, Shakti walked into the camp and was soon noticed with Ligand calling with a wave of his hand. "Captain, come take a load off. You've been working 12 hours straight since we arrived here." "Yes, the food is still warm," Tamana added too, already scooping a serving into a bowl before holding it out. Shakti's sharp senses already told her it smelled great. The level 4 supporter of their group has the mixing DA, and so handled their food. The smell alongside the sight of the golden-haired Chianthrope eager for Shakti to take the food only added to the temptation. Some might be a bit perturbed with that since she also handled their potion-making and materials harvesting, but not Shakti. The transfer from the Dien sect familiar due to a desire for more dungeon exploration had always been an extremely valuable gain. "I appreciate it," Shakti replied, taking it happily and sitting down. In the dungeon and its demands or not, a bowl of good food was a bowl of good food. After several bites where they left her in peace, It was eventually Shakti who broke the silence by asking, "Where is everyone else?" Humoring her since he knew she could guess or sense herself, Ligand merely jovially explained, "Big Sister Ilta is part of the group at the stairs to the 51st floor, as expected." "Still odd you call her that," Tamana muttered in amusement. "Hey, she always demands it," the man replied back, merely shrugging. "If she wants an old man like me doing so, no skin off my back." "Still odd." Shakti merely chuckled. As stated, Ligand was notably older than the familiar vice-captain. Over 40, he had well over a decade on Ilta. He was an agreeable man though, and humoured the whims of Ilta. If anything, it amused Shakti too. Ligand was a big man with a scary appearance from a scar over one cheek, and for some reason that made him calling a younger woman big sister formally as he did ironic. Lord Ganesha agreed, although the way he laughed as he did so seemed to imply that there was some reason only the gods knew behind it. Tamana spoke up now though, explaining, "Anais is sleeping, to recover mind." She told Krem to as well, but "I can hear her with Zens." Shakti cut her off, shrugging. She took a few more bites, then asked bluntly, "Are those two?" That made Ligand chuckle and he answered jokingly, "No, not at all. That's just you again, Captain." Shakti refused to let her reaction to that accusation show on her face, instead noting how he was polishing his armor and commented, "How is the armor holding up?" "Well enough. Probably going to need heavy repairs by the end of this expedition, but best at least make it as clean as possible," he answered, scuffing out a burn mark. "Makes the wifey and kids worry less." "Well, the former. The little ones get excited and often ask about every mark." "They can do that," Shakti said, remembering her own memories of sitting at her parents' knees and asking about their adventures. It felt a lifetime ago. A Ligand was not one she could allow to die here. In her thoughts, and what thoughts she refused to have, her bowl of food was finished and she felt compelled to stand and say, "I'll see if I have any more luck with Krem. She needs to rest like Anais." A monster's cry rang out to break her stated intent though, her head whipping around, and she commented, "From the stairs to the 51st floor." "Since I know that look, go check it out," Ligand told her, standing himself and patting his trousers off. "I'll talk to Krem and Zens. Stop their training." Nodding, Shakti was off. It proved unnecessary. It was just Ilta. Well, the cry came from a black rhino of the deeper floors, but Ilta was clearly behind it. It was already well worn down, and the Amazon continued dancing around it while punishing it for every attempt to strike her with another blow from her fists. "Did you have to bring that up?" "Hey," Rihanna asked. Ilta replied in something of a whine, dropping at Shakti's rebuke. Not that it prevented another shot on the black rhino. Plus, Graint is guarding the stairs. Shakti raised an eyebrow and looked at the other person present before asking, "Is that correct, Rihanna?" "It is, Lady Shakti." "Understood," Shakti said with a nod. "Hey, why is it fine for her?" Ilta protested, even if she stopped caring when another strike came for her to counter. Although, it was also obvious. Rihanna was another level 5. While her lack of any skills or spells made her underwhelming to most, she was also reliable. Besides the fact that she was the only bow user in the upper ranks, she was also arguably the best tamer of the Ganesha familia. Not a frontline combatant, by any means, but reliable. "I'll take over here," she said as she moved towards the monster, whip coming and soon drawing its attention. "Hoping to get a few tamed before we start the final preparations, Captain. If I have trouble, I'll send to you for help." "Do so." Rihanna was arguably the better tamer in their base state, but when Shakti used Darpana Avimutta, Ilta provided a nice distraction, whining as she put her hands behind her head. "And there goes my entertainment. Hey, hey. Sis Tilda, I shall not spar with you," Shakti answered instantly, making her companion groan. She sent her a look before adding, "You do seem unusually worked up though." "Why wouldn't I be?" Ilta answered the unspoken question, throwing a few punches into the air before her. "This is for you to level up, but what next? Not saying it's me, but the future is there. Eventually I'm going to be looking at it too." "It might be better to not look so far ahead," Shakti warned. Ilta had leveled up 3 years ago, but Shakti had been more focused on raising the familiar's level 3 and 4s up than any of the familiar's level 5s. The familiar had gained numerous first-class adventurers in the last few years, but few have progressed much since. Best to focus on mastering yourself over seeking to be more. Shakti wasn't even sure if Anurakti Viroda would work anymore at this point for Ilta. The growth of the level 5s seemed to imply not. Bah, I know the self-discipline is your thing, sis, but some of us are dreams. Ilta responded energetically though, bouncing on her feet. Maybe not soon, but I'm still thinking of it. I wonder how I'll be able to level up. Maybe if I fight one of the Hiryut sisters. You'd lose, Shakti told her bluntly. Gah, you aren't supposed to say it out loud, sis, Ilta whined, although she then growled. And I don't care either. Sometimes you just got to punch someone in the face. If you aren't Amazons, you just don't get it. Shakti merely hummed noncommittally. Ilta would almost certainly lose. While one of the more starkly talented of their familia, it had to be acknowledged. 8 years ago, she had only been level 2 at 18 when Shakti and Adi had defeated the then outlaw to win her over to serving her probation with the Ganesha familia. While Shakti had come to love and rely on, despite their dynamic, one of the last people Adi had recruited in the years since, and had this been able to raise her up to the second strongest member of the familia, it was only right to be cautious when she was compared next to one of Loki's bunch. If Ilta wanted to though, a defeat was not something Shakti worried overly much about. Either way, I'm going to try it someday, Ilta declared, throwing her hands out and grinning. Might even get a new outfit to commemorate it. Leveling up or punching one of the Hiryut sisters in the face. Either works. Will the new outfit at least cover more? Shakti asked, even if it was more joking than anything. Shown by casting her eyes at her companion's body. Eyes pointedly lingering on the fact that the minimal amount possible was covered. Even less. Ilta replied instantly, matching the tease and returning it twice-fold. How is that even possible? The casual talk was interrupted by a new voice speaking up. Oh, talking about leveling up. The speaker also stepped into view. Dench, one of the level 4s. The blonde Chienthrope was still wearing his medium armor, although he had removed his helmet to show blonde hair. He was grinning at them too. At least, he was till Ilta shot forward while crying angrily, eavesdropping. And don't act like it's the leveling up that interested you. Hey, Dench said, avoiding her blows by a hair's breadth. Even joking as she was, Ilta was a higher level. I have sensitive ears, and it's not my fault that you suddenly started joking about probably losing your bra or something before I could interject. I wouldn't lose my bra. Ilta retorted, blows speeding up and Dench letting out a pained gasp. And you reveal what you were thinking of. Shakti sighed. Honestly, she didn't have much space for Ilta's joking flirtations, because she suspected that was what she was. While she believed Ilta had something going on with Hazhana, it was also undeniable that it was likely dying since Hazhana stalled at level 4 and seemingly had little desire to change that. It meant Dench had a chance, as weird as it was for Shakti to consider. Dench was in the same age group and former playmate of Adi, and Shakti had always watched out for him due to it. Ah, let the boy off, big sister, Ligand called out. Ah, fine, Ilta said, drawing back while pouting. Only because Ligand knows how to treat his vice-captain. Just shaking her head, Shakti asked as she moved and sat back in the camp. You returned from the 49th floor. Yeah, veteran Ladako covering, Dench confirmed, rubbing his new bruises even as he sat down too. Were you and the vice-captain talking about leveling up though, Captain? I want to hear too. The two speakers here were Krem and Zenz, the two youngest members of the current group. The newest level 4s too, although that was more a sign of talent than any condemnation. Zenz was a human with black hair, a former farm boy that had come to Orario. Krem was an elf with ash-brown hair, leaving her forest for several years after a wildfire necessitated some years of recovery. We were, Shakti hesitantly confirmed. Ilta was already talking about it, Dench added. Not even Lady Shakti. Hey, we can talk about it too, Ilta protested. You don't have to be right on the edge like sis. Well, that does make this easier for me to say then, Dench said, looking at Shakti. I am considering what it might take for me to make level 5. I know I'm still quite a bit away, probably half a year at least, but I don't want to stand still. Dench might be underestimating himself, although it was easy to understand why. He was typically a supporter of the group, but he was a good supporter. A spell allowed him to carry up to 5 people on a conjured platform, and several skills regarding speed made him something of a maneuver expert. Despite serving as a supporter, he had rather smoothly made it to level 4 under Shakti's watchful gaze. Most supporters didn't dare dream of reaching level 5, but it could be possible for him. Well, if he is going to say it, I might as well too, Tamana interjected, laughing awkwardly. I too am considering it, even if I have a worse chance than Dench. I just leveled up too, but I'm going to get there someday too, Zenz declared eagerly, grinning broadly with all the confidence of an adventurer who had smoothly advanced since he began. If it is under Lady Shakti's gaze, I am sure it is possible, Krem added. I'm thinking to go seek out Disk for some advice. He is often able to surprise with his advice, despite his looks. Did you have to mention his looks? Disk is. Not like his unaware. Still, if we can go dash, not now, Shakti cut off sternly. Need I remind you where we are? This is not a place to add on to your challenges. Yes, Captain. Despite her reprimand, the declarations made Shakti smile. It was good to see, at times. She enjoyed being able to help those around her grow stronger, regardless of her talent. That was her talent. Yet, it also made her feel slightly nauseous. In the end, her nature only allowed her to lower her head and inform them solemnly, worry not. I shall do my utmost to help you all achieve such goals. You need not hurry, I promise. That had always been Shakti's dearest wish, despite the failures. Don't sacrifice yourself too much for them, Captain, Ligand offhandedly said, still polishing his armor. Shakti preferred to pretend not to hear him. Over half of adventurers never reach level 2. Or, more accurately, over half of adventurers are level 1. Although, in reality, even that's rather deceptive. A statement that is strictly true, but purposefully as misleading as possible. After all, that generally refers to active adventurers, and there are many things that can happen to an adventurer. Orario wouldn't need a constant influx of young hopefuls if they didn't lose adventurers constantly. Only the guild knew the actual numbers, and they weren't likely to tell anyone since said influx was necessary. For all that half of Orario's adventurers are level 1 can tell you about the profession, anyone coming to make their fortune in a murder pit was the type of person that would unsurprisingly assume that they were the more fortunate half that would indeed level up. It would be another thing to find out that 3/4 of new adventurers weren't adventurers in 5 years. That death, injuries, or mental exhaustion ensure that barely a quarter reaches that point with Falna still active. That it was half the remainder never leveled up. That if you escaped horrible death, physical crippling, or mental anguish enough to send you running for the hills, chances were still better that you became a magic stone miner. Coming and farming the uppermost floors and easiest monsters with rote movements, spending Vali as quickly as you earned it to indulging in alcohol, sex, and other vices as stress relief for your job. Knowing truly, deep inside you, that the stories people talked about wouldn't be of you. Lily honestly didn't know the numbers, but she naturally assumed it was enough to scare too many away for the guild to ever reveal. On the other hand, adventurers were stupid, greedy people one and all, so Lily figured such facts wouldn't prevent a flow of the stupid and delusional coming to the city of heroes. It was all a joke. Lily had experienced the truth enough to know that as a certainty. Born into this horrible life, Falna on her back as long as she could remember. First experiences during the Dark Ages between the faded glory of Zeus and Hera and the nascent rise of Freya and Loki. The desperation of weak adventurers to use alcohol and more to endure their fear of monsters. The rapacious towards money as dreams of riches faded before reality. The cruelty of those with even a slight bit of power realizing they can at least punch down at those weaker. Lily had tasted and experienced every aspect of the true adventuring life. Certainly more than the glittery, false portrayal that those blessed by luck and talent tricked the naive into believing. So, Lily was not inclined towards romanticism. Thus, when she heard that the king leveled up once again to level 8, her reaction was simple and uncomplicated. Complete indifference. Not even a single thought that this concerned her. She was just Lily. A weak, talentless Palom forced to scrabble and make something of the dirt and shit while people like that stepped over and on her, without thought. She wasn't alone in such a reaction either. Amongst the uncared about masses of low-class adventurers, it was the general reaction. After all, what would people struggling to or having given up on leveling up once think when they heard that the king had just leveled up for the 7th time? They certainly weren't going to empathize with him. He was more some unreachable beast than a person, in their minds. We don't even live in the same worlds. Lily knew that was the truth, and would call anyone who didn't think the same a fool. She just upgraded the distance she felt necessary to keep from him to 50 meters, in case he sneezed in her direction and put her 1,000,000 Vali in debt from medical expenses. Best to ensure he never even looked at her either. Then she moved on without any further thought. It was the way. The strongest could hardly inspire the weakest. They were too distant. Too out of reach for anyone used to the mud and dirty to even dream of. The low-tier adventurers of Orario were more likely to react to someone reaching level 2 than any first-class adventurer doing whatever amazing thing their talent allowed that day. In reality, though, there were too many and they were too insignificant for even that to do more than create a slight burst of energy in a portion that soon died out again. A level 1 or weaker level 2 doing something genuinely amazing, enough to spread amongst the disaffected hordes of level 1s in Orario and make them sit up, was simply too much to ask. Thus, life continued on for Lily and the low-tier adventurers of Orario. They dived, gathered enough magic stones to support themselves for a few days, and then went to deal with whatever hassles life threw their way while trying to find some hope in it. The same unextraordinary grind that defined the average adventurer. It was indirectly that her life began to shift. Gah, more of M. One of the 3 adventurers she was with stated with an annoyed click of the tongue. Where do they keep coming from? At least this one doesn't appear to be from a big familiar. The irritation had been building up for a while. At the beginning of this delve, they had heard the Hephaestus familiar had camped and started to dominate the 12th floor. That had served as justification for this group, which had bragged that they had reached the 10th floor, to stay to the 8th and 9th floors. Yet, that hadn't been the only encounter or warning that had started to wear on them. Apollo Familiar had a group of level 2s come by on the 8th, destroying everything in sight before heading deeper. Then more middle-ranking Familiar followed. Group after group rushing in, clearing the way as they headed deeper. The Magni Familiar, the Modi Familiar, Retri, Circuit, the stronger familiars with multiple level 2 and 3s that made low-ranking familiar like their own shiver in helplessness. Then there was level 1s of the Ether Familiar staking out the 9th floor, and then a proper expedition of their level 2 and 3s. And Lily wasn't going to even mention the glimpse they got of the Ganesha Familiar that was heading down to who knows how deep in the dungeon. Every glimpse of the familiars and adventurers of a different level to them left the 3 she was following in worse and worse moods. Forced them away from the reliable hunting grounds. Made her more and more certain they'd take their aggression out on her. And now, after retreating to the 7th floor, they found yet another group not familiar to the level 1 regulars. Yet, Lily saw the confidence in which they killed off the war shadows and killer ants, despite clearly not being dedicated fighters based on equipment, and chirped with a smile. It is of no issue. Lily is sure a group as strong as this one can easily hunt on the 6th floor. Lily's intuition regarding the adventurers before her didn't help with the adventurers she was with, as her words led to a swift cuff on the head as one then spat. The 6th floor? Some of us aren't as weak as you and actually have some pride. Lily is sorry. This worthless supporter didn't think enough to control her mouth. She instinctively responded despite the bloom of pain in her head. Make sure you do from now on, the adventurer growled, before firming himself with a rough grimace at the group of unknown adventurers before them as he sauntered forth. Quickly focusing on a cow demi-human, the bouncing of the very full chest as she fought instinctively drawing his attention. Hey, who the hell are you guys? We don't recognize you. You think that you can just come in here and stake a claim here? He was completely ignored. It made him grit his teeth, and also for the other 2 in the party to step to his side. All 3 clearly now going full intimidation. Using their rough appearances along with the hint of violence to try and get their way. Hey, didn't you hear us? You think you can just ignore us because you have some numbers? Free up some of the corridor or get lost. The cow demi-human finally deigned to send a look at them, and the utter dismissal in her eyes made Lily's 6th sense scream again as she told them bluntly. You leave. You're in over your heads. The 3 clearly sensed the derision, and it only got them more worked up. See Callie, a sheep demi-human spoke up though, hesitantly approaching the other and tapping on her shoulder. Should we split you up? Some of us go deeper while others stay here. The introduction of the stuttering female sheep demi-human naturally spurred the predatory instincts of the 3, and one gruffly said with a gesture, Yeah, split up and make way. Make this easy. The stuttering demi-human now looked at them too, and it was quickly clear her stutter was not from intimidation of them based on the way she looked at them like a piece of trash on the road. The 3 were too stupid to make the same realization Lily was though, and one spat angrily at the look. Watch your gaze, bitch, before we get irritated. What familiar hasn't taught you to behave like women like you show dash, Freya Familiar? The simple answer from the cow demi-human did more than shut them up. Lily felt her heart stop. The 3 also visibly paled. The sheep demi-human then added, eyes still as scathing as she looked at them. We're part of the Andrymni, healers and supporters of the Freya Familiar. Finally realizing what they were dealing with, all of them, Lily included, took a step backwards. The Freya Familiar. the most feared and imperious familiar in Orario, and these were their healers. It didn't even matter if that left this group of 8 weaker than one would expect of a familiar so far above them. Familiar were notoriously protective of their healers. Anyone to even touch one of these would soon have it turned back on them 100-fold. You'd be lucky if your familiar was merely destroyed and everyone in your family line only made servants. It made any words unnecessary. If anything, any hint of their identities would only raise the risk, as the 3 finally turned and sprinted away. Lily was right there with them too. She had taken many risks and endured much in her life, but she also was still alive because she knew at times when to turn tail and run away. Thus, with but a name spoken, they fled the entire 7th floor without any hesitation or thought of pride. Eventually they came to a halt on the 6th floor, recovering physically and mentally from the close call of a different nature than the dungeon usually offered. Lily's mind was already racing with calculations on what they'd managed to get so far and the discouraged looks coming over the 3 she was following. She spoke cheerily. Lily is sure you all will be able to have an easy time on the 6th floor for the rest of today. Unfortunately, she acted prematurely and the helplessness quickly turned to anger that was directed at her. Asmak this time sent her into the wall, although she forced herself back up quickly. It's done, the adventurer snarled, turning and starting away. Let's finish this damn day. That was not what Lily had been hoping to hear. Your payout comes down to a total of 14,000 Valis. Here you go. And that sealed Lily's bad mood. One shared by the adventurers, with the one in the lead grumbling as he leaned on the guild desk. Bah, 14,000. Pathetic. We would have come out with twice that easy, if we didn't have such bad luck. Of course, Mr. Odell. You and your companions are reliable and experienced adventurers, the pretty guild receptionist replied, practiced smile on her face. Yeah, he agreed, pleased by the words and soon continuing. What is with all the familiar going deep, anyways? It's never like this. They just create trouble for us that are working hard to improve and build our familiars up, you know. It must be extremely difficult for you, but I am confident you can manage. Course I will. I'm going to be big, you know. Everyone will know the name of my familiar. The dash Lily had to make sure not to glare at the guild receptionist. It was hard, as she once again felt the intense jealousy rising in her. What an easy job. No adventuring yourself. Just be pretty enough, flash a few smiles to adventurers, act as if they are big shots, and everyone is suddenly trying to impress you. Lily wondered how many presents they probably received from fools like this one who weren't clever enough to see through the fake smile she was giving him. Apologies, Mr. Odell. I would be happy to talk to you more, but I must keep working or my supervisor will come and yell at me. And whenever they got bored of listening to the banal boasts of adventurers, they also had a built-in excuse that no adventurer would go against. Some people had all the luck. Okay. I'll talk to you next time when it is less busy, the adventurer said, smile dropping as he turned and tossed Lily a small pouch. There, your pay, brat. Thank you, Mr. Adventurer, she immediately said, subtly trying to calculate how much was within based on feel. Not that she needed to, as he smirked with self-satisfaction and informed her outright. I cut a bit off from it. I know we agreed on 20%, but we faced so few monsters we had so little use for you that 10% is fairer. I even made it 1,500 since I'm generous. And Lily had no luck. Oh, thank you, Mr. Adventurer, Lily said as she smiled sweetly at him and gave a deep bow. I am sorry that Lily could not help you more, and grateful you are willing to overlook a burden like Lily on you strong adventurers. It came easy. She was used to this. Those who didn't steal her own potions or weapons were actually the better ones, as much as something like that could even be said of adventurers. It didn't stop Lily's face from twisting in bitterness as she bowed, or her hands gripping the bag of Valis tightly. 1,500 Valis. Pathetic. Enough for a few days if one lives in squalor, but little more. Certainly not enough to keep up with the taxes of her familiar, much less squirreling some away to buy her freedom one day. Even Lily could have made more than this in a few hours if she'd went in herself to hunt a few monsters on the first few floors. Lily actually considered that such might be needed after such a mess of a day, but her pounding heart soon made her shake her head in chastisement. Lily had already failed at being an adventurer herself. She was better off finding a prominent mark in an adventurer. Lily turned to leave, but a voice came up from behind. Excuse me, Miss Supporter. Yes, Miss Receptionist. Lily asked as she spun to look at the receptionist with a wide smile, trying to hide her own tension. Is there anything Lily can do for you? Lily can't imagine there's anything one like she can do, but she'll do whatever you want. Besides her jealousy, Lily tried to keep her distance from the guild from fear too. If they caught on to her, everything would be over. To avoid that was much of what restrained her. Lily Ruka Ard of the Soma Familia, correct? The receptionist asked. She clearly checked something. Dedicated supporter for 8 years. Yes, Miss Receptionist. There are new missions on the board for independent supporters, especially those with more experience, the receptionist informed her. I would recommend you check them out. There's a dire press for manpower starting to arise in the stronger Familia. Lily was confused at that, but thanked her and started walking regardless. A Miss Ion for independent supporters? Lily couldn't recall that ever happening. Anyone with the funds to make a mission through the guild was in a position to use other methods. They could check in with allies or, more likely, they were of a familia large enough for them to conscript weaker and newer members as their supporters. Missions would only be necessary if they needed more supporters than their familia or personal network could procure. Yet, Lily felt her eyes widen as she saw just that. There were several others also looking, but she was able to use her size to get a good look. There were pamphlets for new supporters, but also more experienced ones. Lily quickly skimmed the ones that required several years of experience and agility at E, the highest she qualified for. Apollo Familia, Uther Familia, Modi Familia, Ishtar Familia. There were other aspects that surprised her too. Most actually were for periods of time. Some had set payments, through the guild. It was too unbelievable, but she nonetheless found herself grabbing every relevant flyer before fleeing. Lily made sure to throw off any tails that might have been waiting for her outside the guild. She moved through crowds while going in circles. Used moments in isolated alleys to transform her appearance with Cinderella. Kept going further. Finally she felt confident enough to use an isolated nook in an alley to look at the flyers she'd grasped more closely. Her confusion only increased further. Why did such large familiars that usually used their weaker level ones as supporters suddenly decided they needed to outsource for that role? Too many experiences with the scum of Orario made her suspicious. The missions were through the guild, with their moderation of terms being upheld, not going to prevent one from disappearing her in the dungeon as soon as the term of service was ended and they were expected to finally pay her, or prevent Zani's from doing something to ensure they paid all her funds to him directly, since she had long since learned how much adventurers cared about some Paolum. Yet, Lily couldn't throw them away, couldn't force herself to tear them up. Instead, her hands only tightened on them and her mind started wandering to what if. Instinct told her to throw this away and return to her previous method. But was it smarter? Lily knew more than anyone how much she was struggling. How at risk she was of one adventurer getting too angry. Of someone learning of Cinderella. Of her stash being found and years of work saving funds to buy her freedom being looted by some asshole adventurer. Lily already hadn't made the progress she'd hoped to over the years. The gaining of Cinderella 3 years ago was a great boon that revitalized her efforts, but it wasn't a cure-all. There were enough demi-humans with senses of smell enough to track her down if she tried to flee Zani's. The guild was also a risk. She needed to be able to exchange magic stones and drops, and that meant keeping up a consistent appearance as a supporter in her true appearance. Only a part of the time could she act under disguise, and she had to keep the times she stole or tricked adventurers for those times as she couldn't have it traced back to her actual name and appearance. If someone in the Soma Familia learned of Cinderella, she'd likely be sold to a brothel like they'd once discussed when she'd been younger. If the guild managed to learn of her stealing and tricking adventurers, her ability to earn funds legitimately would be shot too. Lily knew she was dancing on the edge. At times, she even relished it. Finally able to strike back against those who abused and took advantage of her using the same methods they would. She didn't blind herself though and assume everything would be fine. It had never been for her. Tightening her hands on the flyers, Lily decided to at least investigate to see if this might offer a chance that might not come back. The Apollo Familia, a newly raised D-rank exploration familia. Lily moved and checked out their familia house. It was annoyingly impressive. Wealth beyond what she could imagine. She instead focused on loitering around the area, picking up gossip with some aid of Cinderella. It wasn't too hard either. Apollo Familia was big and noticeable, but also not overly respected. At least, not enough to prevent people from idly gossiping whenever members weren't around. It gave Lily some valuable information, more than what was publicly available at the guild. The Familia had a level 3 captain and numerous level 2s. Enough to be a solid middle-ranking Familia of Orario. Despite that, they hadn't delved deep for their current ranking. Rumors stated that Apollo liked money and luxury, and the familiar members focused mostly on that. Some harsher rumors said their recent rank up from E to D was just from the guild tiring of it, and thus putting them at the rank where they were mandated to conduct expeditions to reach new floors. Overall, a familiar with a pervy god that might fixate on her, especially if he learned of Cinderella. If Lily wanted to have to deal with things like that, might as well go with the Ishtar familiar who offered more money. Rejected. Modi familiar, a C-ranked familiar. Much smaller and less showy than the Apollo familiar, but also stronger. They had multiple level 3s making up their executives. They only numbered 24, but at least half of that number of new level 2s or veteran level 1s. Composed of several races, although no dwarfs. Rivalry with the Magni familiar, driving from a rivalry between the two gods that was joked of as almost a brother-like situation. A more reliable choice, seemingly, but also rather demanding on time with a full 3-month contract. Provisionally rejected. Dellinger familiar, an F-ranked familiar. Looser schedule, but smaller and weaker familiar with but a few level 2s, which unfortunately meant a lesser salary. Rejected. Ratri familiar, a D-ranked familiar. Larger, stronger. Not a reliable reputation, however. A rough and tumble sort of familiar. Rejected. Circuit familiar, a D-ranked familiar. Actually tempting. Many members. A lesser proportion of them being level 3s or stronger level 2s, but overall strong. It was also a more dispersed familiar, with a number of groups generally living and operating separately. It made less chance of them prying into a supporter. Together with a looser contract where she is paid the more she helps them, it was only the lesser incentives that made her put them on hold. Provisionally rejected. It was investigating these familiar that Lily learned of why so many middle-ranked familiars were starting to move so. The king leveling up. It almost made Lily scoff. Apparently it was starting at the strongest familiars. Movements that someone like Lily never even noticed. Big declarations of expeditions deep into the dungeon. Equipment and supplies being bought in bulk. All sorts of talk about driving to reach new floors and achieve new level ups. This would be all for today, next part coming soon, so please like, share and subscribe to get informed as soon as the next part drops.